morning.
Morning.
How is everyone?
Just to let everybody know, we are live on YouTube. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen briefly just to have the title slide up, and then we'll get started here in just a minute.
Morning, all.
Good morning.
No, Lord.
So we have all of us online right now, right?
Yes, hold on. I'm just doing my count real quick. Sorry, I'm
I
having
just did mine.
unstable connection problems. Yes, we have everyone that we're just missing Dr. Robertson, but he's not able to join us today. So we do have everyone that is supposed to be here.
Okay, let me know when we are able to start.
We are live, so I think President Gecker, we can
Good.
go ahead and get started. It's
Good.
10 o'clock.
Welcome to everybody and welcome back to the board members for, I guess, day 3. Yet another meeting of the hardest working, most underpaid board in the Commonwealth, the Virginia Board of Education. We'll do a roll call first and the quick announcements. Dr. Wilson.
Here.
Ms. Davis-Vaught. I know I heard her before. She's muted, but she's speaking.
Present, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Duran.
Present.
Ms. Holton.
Here.
Dr. Mann.
Here.
Dr. Pexton.
Here.
And Mr. Swan.
Here.
And Dr. Robertson, as noted, is absent. Good morning. Welcome to the Board of Education's virtual meeting. Our meeting today is being streamed live on the VBOE YouTube channel and on the board's public meeting webpage. We'd like to welcome those joining us on the live stream from across the Commonwealth. A couple of things to note about our virtual meeting. The board accepted written public comment for this meeting. All comments that were received by 5 p.m. on Tuesday have been uploaded to our meeting webpage and shared with board members in time for them to review in advance of today's meeting. Comments received after 5 p.m. on Tuesday will be provided to the board in a timely manner. For our YouTube watchers, the chat feature is disabled as it is not monitored by staff. The best way to contact the board is via email at BOE, as in Board of Education, at doe.virginia.gov. I am pleased to announce that unless something changes, today will be the last virtual meeting for the board. We do plan to resume in-person meetings in June, while still adhering to all the current social distancing and masking requirements. More details about the location will be released as we get closer to the June 16-17 2021 meeting dates. I will note that we do plan to continue to offer a live stream option as we have done for many years. Before we move into the agenda, I would also like to make an edit to the agenda related to items G and H. We have recently been made aware of some additional flexibility with regard to the timeline required for board action on the training and guidance requirements of House Bill 1904 and Senate Bill 1196. Given that additional flexibility, we are going to defer items G and H until the June board meeting. All right, have board members had a chance to review the meeting minutes for the March 17 and 18 meetings? Are there edits, or is there a motion to adopt as drafted?
I move to adopt both sets of minutes as drafted.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Okay, again by roll call here, Dr. Wilson,
Aye.
Ms. Davis Vaught,
Aye.
Dr. Duran,
Aye.
Ms. Holton,
Aye.
Dr. Mann,
Aye.
Dr. Pexton,
Aye.
Mr. Swan,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Okay, to the consent agenda, are there any items anybody would like to remove from the consent agenda? Or alternatively, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda as drafted or as set forth?
Motion to adopt.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Is there a second?
Second, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Davis Vaught. All right, again by roll call, Dr. Wilson,
Aye.
Ms. Davis Vaught,
Aye.
Dr. Duran.
Sorry, aye. I get off mute. Aye.
That's okay. Ms. Holton,
Aye.
Dr. Mann,
Aye.
Dr. Pexton,
Aye.
and Mr. Swan.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Okay. That brings us to item D, final review of withdrawal of the proposed stage of the periodic review of the regulations governing educational services for gifted students. Mr. Bowling, I think. Yeah, Mr. Bowling.
Yes, hi, good morning.
Aye.
Good morning, President Gecker, Dr. Lane, members of the board. This morning I bring to you item D, responsive to the board's discussion at the March 18th, 2021 board meeting. For background, on March 12th, 2021, the board received 2 letters from the African American Superintendent's Advisory Council. One letter addressing advancing racial equity in Virginia's public schools, and another encouraging the board to issue guidance on the governance of academic year governor schools. The impetus behind the letter requesting the board to issue guidance on the governance of academic year governor schools came from House Bill 2305, Delegate Tyler, from the 21 General Assembly. That bill required the Board of Education to issue guidance on the governance of academic year governor schools, including communication on outreach practices, admissions policies, and guidelines on diversity, equity, and inclusion training. This bill was passed indefinitely by the Senate's Education and Health Committee. Subsequently, the board engaged in a discussion at the March 18, 2021 business meeting and suggested the desire to withdraw the previously approved regulations governing educational services for gifted students to allow time for additional review. Withdrawal of the regulations today would allow staff time for additional review of the proposed language and consideration of additions or edits responsive to the suggestions and recommendations and feedback received, and additional feedback from the public. The Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends that the board approve the withdrawal of the proposed stage of the periodic review of the regulations governing educational services for gifted students.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bowling. Is there anybody on the board who'd like to speak to this issue? Ms. Holton?
Just one very brief question for Mr. Bowling. I confess that I have not gone back and looked at the proposed draft that was in process. I take it, I know you all have, and I take it that it does not adequately address the issues. It does not appear to adequately address the issues that we have recently been discussing with regard to gifted education. So in other words, there's a need to go back and look at it. This, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That's all I need.
There is a need, yes.
Okay, and again, to make it clear for the public, this withdrawal is really not to stop these regs, but again, to look at revisions to the regs in light of certain comments that have, come up since we put these regs out there. Anybody else? If not, is there a motion to, withdraw those regs?
So moved, President
Thank
Gecker.
you. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Pexton. All right, roll call. Dr. Wilson,
Aye.
Ms. Davis Vaught,
Aye.
Dr. Duran,
Aye.
Ms. Holton,
Aye.
Dr. Mann,
Aye.
Dr. Paxton,
Aye.
Mr. Swan,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Okay, item E, final review of withdrawal of the proposed stage of the regulations establishing standards for accrediting public schools in Virginia to comport with legislative changes from House Bill 1215. That's from the 2012 General Assembly. Dr. Sale.
Thank you, President Gecker, and thank you, President Wilson, members of the board, and Dr. Lane. It is my pleasure to be back in front of the board this morning, and also pleasure to be somewhat of an encore to Mr. Bowling's presentation, since he really set the stage for both his item and my own. So like the one before it, this item is going to ask the board to consider withdrawing a regulatory action currently in the proposed stage in order to allow additional time for staff and the board to review based on new information and context. So the regulatory action in front of us this morning pertains to the board's regulations establishing standards for accrediting public schools in Virginia, which we more commonly known as the standards of accreditation. And in 2012, the board had initiated action to amend the standards of accreditation to comport with new legislation passed in that 2012 session, which had addressed or rather tasked the Board of Education to promulgate regulations specific to standards of accreditation of public virtual schools that enroll students full-time. These standards were intended to address those situations in which a public school student would take all of their coursework virtually rather than in the traditional brick and mortar setting. So this regulatory action did not proceed past the proposed stage. So our last action to date was on July 2nd, 2015. Though it's unclear exactly what delayed further action on these regulations, there remains a clear need and perhaps even arguably a heightened need to ensure virtual education regulations are updated and implemented. So in withdrawing the proposed regulations, staff would have the opportunity to revise and the board would have the opportunity to review and approve new virtual regulations that consider the growing interest in and potential for the use of virtual education, the service delivery model that is unique to the virtual setting, and of course the need to establish more consistent standards and expectations for the virtual education experience with the intent that we drive high quality instruction and student achievement in all settings across the board. And this was also an opportunity for us to build on lessons learned and best practices in the virtual education space that weren't available to us during the original action. And of course, we've seen a lot evolve in the last now 6 years. So as Mr. Bowling noted, the board's authority to consider this action comes from the Administrative Processes Act and allow for the withdrawal of regulation or of a regulatory action at any point in the process before those regulations become effective. So with that, I will hand it back to the board, noting that the Superintendent of Public Instruction does recommend the board approve the withdrawal of these proposed stage regulations.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sale. Are there any questions by board members? I mean, actually, as Dr. Sale noted, it's a mystery why we didn't finish out, we, in this case being our predecessor board, didn't finish the process that was mandated in 2012 by the General Assembly. However, since that time, we have completely revamped the standards of accreditation. And so it's not clear, frankly, whether the 2012 action or what was requested could be done in the same form it's being done today. That's number one. And number two, also, as Dr. Sale mentioned, it may be time to look at a more robust, more robust regulations regarding virtual delivery of content. It's clearly going to be here to stay, and maybe we ought to think a little bit more about what we're doing in that regard. We could not do that under the existing, as the regs have been put out right now under the existing notices. So we are likely going to have to do, I would assume, and Susan, I know is on the call, a new notice of intent of regulatory action in order to do all the things we ought to do in this case.
Yes, if you want to go beyond just what that bill did from 2012, you would need to issue a new NORA and specify the scope of the intended action.
Right, so this will be a new significant piece of work for us, actually. In any event, that's my summary of item E, which I hope doesn't differ too much from Dr. Sale's. To the extent they differ, Dr. Sale ought to be considered correct. So, Ms. Holton.
Just very briefly, can we ask that Ms. Williams, council look before we make a final determination? Because that original Nora might have been pretty broad. I mean, the legislative mandate was pretty broad. If the Nora was pretty broad, you know, yes, we need to do a lot of work here, I'm sure, but the breadth of well, just recognizing that we're way behind already, anything we can do to accelerate the process while we do good, careful work would be wonderful. And the Nora APA question over my pay grade, but just let's make sure we need to do it again before we do it.
Yeah, it's not going to cost us a lot of time, and I think the intent is to issue the Nora in June.
If that doesn't cost us a lot of time, my concern is addressed.
Yep.
And just so you'll know, I have reviewed the NORA, and it is specific to comporting with that legislation. So it would be restrictive in that manner.
We have had significant discussion about this, Ms. Halton.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, is there a motion?
So moved, President Gecker.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Is there a second?
Second, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Vaught. Again, roll call. Dr. Wilson?
President Gecker?
Yes.
President Gecker, before you move forward, I just want to clarify that the motion is to withdraw not just the proposed stage, but the proposed stage and the Nora stage. Is that correct?
I think that's what I heard as the motion.
I just wanted to clarify.
Dr. Wilson, I assume that's what you meant?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. The board's on top of it, Emily, but thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Wilson.
Aye.
Ms. Davis-Vaught.
Aye.
Dr. Duran.
Aye.
Ms. Holton.
Aye.
Dr. Mann.
Aye.
Dr. Pexton.
Aye.
Mr. Swan.
Aye.
And I vote aye. Thank you all very much for that. Okay, item F. First review of the proposed approval of the Region 7 Joint Operated Virtual School, the Region 7 Virtual Academy. Mr. Bowling, and I guess you'll introduce your presenters also.
I will.
Thank you.
Good morning again. Good to see you. President Gecker, Dr. Lane, members of the board. Item F brings a formal request for consent to establish a joint operated school in Virginia as required by 22.126 of the Code of Virginia. Section 22.126 requires that the Virginia Board of Education's consent when two or more school boards wish to establish a joint or regional school or program. 13 school divisions in Superintendent's Region 7 have partnered together to create the Region 7 Virtual Academy. The Region 7 Virtual Academy is being established to alleviate the participating school divisions' demands of providing both remote and in-person learning opportunities. Details regarding the establishment of the Region 7 Virtual Academy are included in Attachment A, including an overview, budget, and course offering options by approved providers and Virtual Virginia. This item is being brought to the board today for first review. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Keith Perigin, Superintendent of Bristol Schools, who will provide additional information and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. Mr. Gecker, members of the board, Dr. Lane, appreciate the opportunity to present today. Mr. Gecker, you actually set this up perfectly for me in the last item when you mentioned that virtual learning is here to stay. And I think we realize that here in Region 7. And back in October, well, I guess to set the stage, in case members of the board do not know, many school divisions in Southwest Virginia have been providing fully in-person opportunities for students to learn since August. We've also provided the opportunity for students and families who want to remain remote to stay in that format as well. And this is not true across the entire region, but it's pretty close. We started out the school year with about 70% of our students learning fully in person and about 30% of our students learning virtually. Because our school divisions are small, we were unable to assign teachers just to the virtual world or the in-person world. And so we actually had teachers, all of our teachers, teaching both in-person students and virtual students. As you can imagine, that is quite a task. And as we moved through the fall, it became more and more apparent that the coronavirus was not going to end soon. And we realized that we would be providing virtual instruction into next year and probably for the remainder of our school careers, because as Mr. Gecker said, Pandora's box has been open and virtual learning is here to stay. We knew that we could provide virtual learning, but we could not continue to ask our teachers to live in both worlds. And so a group of superintendents from Region 7 got together in October and started talking about how we could come together as a region and provide this to take that burden off of our teachers and off of our small school divisions. We realized very quickly that was the way to move forward. A couple days later, we met with Michael Bowling, since he has experience in setting up a regional academy, not virtual, but a regional academy nonetheless, and decided that we were going to work with the Department of Ed about moving forward to do this. And the purpose being that we want to take, as I mentioned earlier, take the load off of our teachers. We also have the added benefit of taking care of some of those hard to staff teaching areas because we're coming together and working together as an entire region. We also realize that would provide additional opportunities for our students to take courses from a regional standpoint that they might not be able to take if they stayed in just their division alone. But also we were seeing some declines in enrollment because our students were enrolling with multi-divisional online providers. And by creating a virtual academy, we would protect ourselves from future loss of enrollment to MOPS because we would have that option available ourselves. And so initially we had planned to create a curriculum and an online environment on our own with our own staff and hiring our own staff. But very quickly, that idea morphed, and I will turn the mic over to Dr. Rob Graham from Radford, and he can tell you what happened next in that process.
Thank you, Dr. Perigin, and President Gecker, members of the board, Dr. Lane, and others. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning and listen on our behalf as we request for the Region 7 Virtual Academy. And as Keith said, this is something that's been really it's kind of been fun to go through the process, and we're so close as a region and feel very comfortable with each other and feel really fortunate during these trying times to have each other here in Region 7 too. So as Keith said, I've been lucky enough to partner with Stride this year, and in one of our meetings, trying to wrap my head around trying to do this as on our own to provide remote learning to all our students in Region 7 was just too much. In fact, kept me up at night sometimes too, but reached out to Stride and said, would you consider being a provider for us? And then that kind of got the ball rolling. Got in touch with Brian Mott with Virtual Virginia. He's been absolutely wonderful and a partner now too. And then Edgenuity reached out to us. All three of those folks we've had wonderful experience with in Region 7 and just found them to be extremely supportive. So we have 3 online platforms that allow Region 7 students who want to be remote next year the option of choosing, and has saved the Region 7 superintendents a whole lot of work. I mean, an enormous amount of work. And then we were lucky enough to hire, and you can see Caitlin's on here right now, Caitlin Cosme, who is going to be our executive director. And thank goodness we have her. She has just jumped on board and just taken the bull by the horns and really expanded our academy. And we're at the point now where we're finalizing our agreements with the 2 entities that we have with Stride and Edgenuity. We've worked with Brian already, and he's ready to go too. So she has certainly been an asset for us, and I'm gonna just turn it over to her a little bit to let you know a little bit more about what we're doing and how we're gonna move forward too. So Caitlin.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Gecker, members of the board, Dr. Lane, we appreciate your time today. I will say we now have 19 divisions in Region 7, and now we're actually up to 17 out of those 19 participating in the Regional Academy. The document that you have, I think as an attachment in your notes there, kind of lays out our plan. But at this time, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know you maybe had a few on the first look, so we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Mr. Swan.
How does this affect the federal funding for each school division? Is it a matter of just transferring those funds to the virtual academy? And will the school division lose funding for those particular students that are going to the virtual academy?
Mr. Swan, first of all, congratulations on the awesome award, the well-deserved award that you've received this year. And that is a great question. Students will remain enrolled in the sending divisions. We will continue to provide many of the services that students have that are outside of the instructional model. The virtual academy will only provide the instruction. The sending school divisions will provide all other services, and they will remain on the enrollment of the sending division.
Kind of a follow-up question.
Please, yeah, Mr. Swan.
I'm sorry. The virtual academy will keep up with the attendance, correct? So what happens when there's a broadband issue? How will you guys address attendance? Will the student be still counted absent and it counts against their academics? How will that be addressed?
One of the great things about coming together as a region to do this, we also maintain autonomy as divisions. And so in Bristol, we have very good broadband access, thankfully, but many school divisions in Region 7 do not. And so the local divisions will handle those attendance issues as they do in their normal attendance policy. And the local divisions will also make decisions based upon how they provide broadband access to students who may not have it otherwise. But even though we're coming together as a region to provide the service, local divisions will still have a lot of authority and autonomy and responsibility to those students that remain on their roles in the local division.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Dr. Wilson.
Good morning. Thank you all very much for being with us. And Dr. Perigin, I appreciate your graciousness in allowing your principal to serve with us here on our board. So I want to start by saying that. But I do have a question. I noticed in the documents that there is an intent to develop admissions criteria. I assume the board, once it is seated, will do that. This perhaps is not a question, but just an acknowledgement that I would have concern, or at least want to have a critical eye toward those admissions criteria that ensure accessibility for all students across your divisions, and it not become, that ultimately this great thing that you're trying to do becomes then an issue of access that disproportionately affects one group of students or another.
Dr. Wilson, I think that is a great point, and our regional board will set a recommended criteria. We also will use the Department of Education will be issuing recommendations in regards to Senate Bill 1303, and we will tie those in to our recommendations as well. But at the end of the day, admission will, those final decisions, even though we'll provide guidance, will be made by the individual school divisions. But it will be in conjunction with the regional board's recommendation and the Virginia Department of Education's Senate Bill 1303 recommendations as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Dr. Wilson, if I may too, we have a draft enrollment eligibility criteria that we'd be more than happy to share with you. And of course, it is a draft until we know more about Senate Bill 1303, but Caitlin can certainly send that to Mr. Bowling and he can share that with you all if you would like that.
I was going to speak on that as well. Yes, r7va.org is the website that we've developed. It's actually listed on that website, r7va.org, and you can that website will continue to evolve as this regional academy does. But there is a link to that tentative enrollment and eligibility criteria there. You'll notice at the bottom it does provide the flexibility for those individual divisions to allow students who maybe don't meet that criteria into the program, so that we keep that equity and access open.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, so the board itself and the group of superintendents, which has come together to form this, perhaps has an opportunity to lead in this area. But we certainly know that individual divisions do what they need to do. But where there's opportunity for leadership, that would certainly be welcome. And I'll go to that website. Thank you. So no need to send it to me. And I think Dr. Lane just put it here for us. So thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Holton.
First, congratulations on the work you all have done this fall. Yes, we are aware, Dr. Berrigan, that you all have been both in person and virtual. We do have a source on what's going on in your district, and I can't imagine what it's been like to teach virtually this year for school divisions, but schools such as yours that are doing both, it's just beyond imagination, the amount of work and innovation and creativity that's required, and we bow down in appreciation. And for the creativity involved in bringing this matter to the fore. First, just a request that, as you heard earlier, we are going to be looking at the putting together regulations for virtual education in Virginia, virtual academies in Virginia. So get involved in that and help us get it right. So that's my request. My question is, so I think I understand correctly that the homeschool divisions are basically responsible for everything other than academic content. So you are absolutely going to still be providing everything from meals to counseling to watching out for dropouts, et cetera. And I applaud that model. I think that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the content, my knowledge of virtual education providers generally is that there's some good ones and some that are not so effective. I have complete confidence in Virtual Virginia, and I see that you're offering a wide variety of, I think the entire Virtual Virginia catalog is in your catalog, as I understand it, will be in the catalog. I would appreciate hearing a little more about the other two providers, Edgenuity and now look for the name of the other one, but how did you go about selecting those, and what can you tell us, the Stride program, what can you tell us about their quality generally and about their ability to deliver the Virginia specific content?
I'll defer to Dr. Graham. He is the resident expert on the MOPS for us.
And I love also the collaboration with Radford. That's just what a great, terrific bringing people together you all have done.
Thank you so much. So the two other providers that we have, Stride and Edgenuity. Stride is a they started as K-12. I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but they started at K-12, and VAVA, Virginia Virtual, actually started in Region 7. I think it was close to 20 years ago. They started in Carroll County with a remote learning program for one of their organizations that they had within their county. So they've been around for more than 20 years, serving remotely in Virginia. They also are across the country, K-12, which now is Stride. And you can go onto their website and see the variety of offerings that they have. But for curriculum-wise, they are very strong. We are partnering with them this year. We, in fact, had 11 students in Radford who are part of Virginia Virtual, but since we're partnering with them now, they actually are enrolled in Radford too. And I've spoken with the families of those 11 or 12 students, and they are very happy with the learning platform that they provide. They do both asynchronous and synchronous learning. Now, Edgenuity, Ms. Holton, I'm not as familiar with. I know they are more of a credit recovery type of organization and moving into more of the full remote learning academic platform as well. So I don't know. I know Dr. Perigin uses them, I think, Keith, right now, don't you? A little bit for credit recovery, but I'm not as familiar. As far as how we chose those two, we had, so once we had the board in place and we started to look at partnerships, we knew Virtual Virginia was going to be one that we wanted to have because we've had extensive experience with them, and Brian is so easy to work with, and of course they're part of the Virginia Department of Education. And then Stride was fairly easy because they've been a partner with us, and they also are partners with 5 or 6 other divisions in Virginia. And then Edgenuity reached out to us. They were kind of the first ones to reach out to us beyond the 2 that we already had. And then once that happened, it really morphed into a lot of organizations wanting to be a part of this too. But we simply didn't feel like that we needed more than 3 to be able to house the amount of students that we feel like we're going to have remotely next year when the 2021, 2022 school year begins. So those are the three that we've chosen. We've met probably twice a week since we started this, and they have just been wonderful. One of the things that they are pledging to us, which we really appreciate, and I think you all should know this, is $50,000 to our curriculum instructional program, which we have here in Region 7 too, which will help us really make that even more robust than it is. And that's a platform that we have to help us with not only academics, but data as far as looking at where our students are and the growth that they have.
I'll just add to that, Ms. Holton. First of all, I'd like to really thank Dr. Lane for being creative as well and providing a pricing structure with Virtual Virginia that really made that an option. And it also helped us as we were negotiating with the others. And that was one of the big things that came out of this regional academy. And Robbie, you may need to mute because there's probably an echo.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It really helped us get competitive pricing. Our school divisions could afford this across the board. And for example, some school divisions will choose just one provider, and it may be Virtual Virginia, for example. I know some school divisions are going to go solely with Virtual Virginia. In Bristol, we're going to use all three providers with the idea that some of our students who are higher achieving, we will probably assign them to Virtual Virginia. Edgenuity has done a really great job in our alternative programs and with some of our students who need more support. And so for those students, we'll probably choose Edgenuity. And for those students who are in the middle of the road from an achievement standpoint, we will probably use Stride. And so the amount of options that we have available to us because of this regional partnership are phenomenal. And because the regional partnership also provided a pricing structure that for the first time really made significant virtual learning affordable to our high poverty school divisions.
So if I may, just by way of a quick follow-up question, that's all very reassuring. And I hope and trust that you have built into your plans some monitoring for outcomes with each of the providers and, academic outcomes, but also, well, the immediate academic outcomes, but also hopefully, contributing to graduation rates and post-secondary rates. If you build all that in from the beginning, it will help you both evaluate the mix of providers you're using over time, but also help us all evaluate virtual options generally.
Yeah, and that's a great
just
point.
My impression of the national evidence is that some of these virtual academies work and some of them don't. And so we want this to be one of the ones that does.
And the competition will help because I can assure you, especially the MOPS, they really want our business. And as we're looking at those outcomes, I think that will help assure that we're getting a high quality service and product to our students because they want to be with us again in year 2. And so that will be definitely part of the monitoring process from a student standpoint, but also from a program standpoint, and it'll help us hold those online providers accountable.
And if I may too, that's why we have Caitlin as well. Caitlin's going to be not only monitoring the partners that we have, but she's going to be tasked with part of her job description is to make sure that all the divisions, those remote students are doing well. And if they are not doing well, she's going to be the first contact for the superintendents to be able to reach out to support those students. And we don't want to, we've talked about this quite a bit, we don't want to kick them out of the remote learning platform the very first time that there's some difficulties. And she's wonderful with the relationships. So she's going to jump in there and see what she can do in order to provide support and hopefully get those students back on task. And the other thing I wanted to say too, with Matt Hurt in the curriculum instruction program, he's absolutely wonderful with data. And that's why these folks are partnering with him too, is so he can do his data analysis of the remote learning platforms that we have and tell us what we're doing well and what we need to improve on too.
Yeah, Dr. Mann.
Yes, thank you.
Then Mr. Swan, I know your hand's up, but I'm going in order. Dr. Mann.
Oh, thank you, President Gecker, and thank you all for that great overview. And I share the excitement that others have spoken to about this partnership and what it could mean for the region. My questions probably isn't so much a question, maybe more so for Dr. Lane, because it's clear that, as we've said, this is a reality that's here to stay. And while we've had to go in this direction under the conditions of COVID to ensure that children are continuing to have access to education, I think as we are being asked to really make decisions in this space around regulations, I think it would be very, very helpful, at least for me, not being as familiar with the research around distance education, particularly for children on the K side. I would really love it if the board could have access to a summary of kind of what is the state of knowledge around distance education and its impact for very young children. We talk about screen time and development and the importance of social emotional. And I just think that's going to be very helpful for me to kind of really make sure as we're setting structures in place, we are really attending to what we know about development and for the youngest children with use of technology at this level of intensity.
Mr. Gecker, I'll just respond quickly if you'd like.
Sure.
Thanks for the question, Dr. Mann. And what I would say is part of the item that you approved with the withdrawal earlier today opens up the door for us to explore a lot of that as a board. But I will say that as it relates to the current requirements, which don't necessarily address a lot of your questions, the Region 7 proposal falls within that.
Okay, Mr. Swan.
Yes, I'm loving this idea of the virtual academy. I just have kind of two questions. I didn't see it in the attachments. How would the teachers be selected? And if veteran teachers are selected, what will be put in place in order to help them?
Mr. Swan, I'm happy to take that question. Our original plan that we started with in October would be that we would hire our own teachers. However, when that morphed into partnering with Virtual Virginia and the multi-divisional online providers, those groups will hire their own teachers. And so, but they're required to have the same credentials and criteria that a public school teacher that's teaching in person will have. And so that we don't have a choice in selecting those teachers. However, we will have a hand in part of the evaluation process and then working with those teachers to ensure that students are being successful.
And I will piggyback off of that in relation to Ms. Holton's question. That was one of the reasons we chose those programs, is because they were Virginia approved MOPs. And so we knew that their teachers would be, highly qualified, certified Virginia instructors.
Thank you.
Ms. Holton.
Just very briefly, if I can follow up on Mr. Swan's, when 50 billion years ago, when my youngest child was in middle school, she took a Virtual Virginia Chinese course, which never would have been something she could have taken at a Richmond Public School middle school, but for that option. And at that point, there were actually two teachers involved. So there was the Chinese speaking online instructor, but there was also a Virtual Virginia teacher whose job it was to do the in-person interaction, both with my daughter and me, and called me up to do parent-teacher conferences and met with, graded my daughter's work, etc. So she had both the native Chinese speaker instructor and a Virginia, Virtual Virginia employee who was doing all the student engagement work. It was a very impressive product. There were technology glitches then, but as I say, it was a billion years ago.
Anybody else? Yeah, I think I had just one question, because I'm just trying to understand what the advantage of the joint school is when we're outsourcing essentially all the providers. Would have understood it if we were using division personnel and putting together something. Is it just bargaining power? I mean, what's the reason to do this if everything's outsourced?
Mr. Gecker, that bargaining power is certainly part of that, but also by pooling our resources and being able to hire Caitlin and potentially even expanding that to additional staff in the future. That also takes that burden of overseeing the project off of the each individual superintendent and puts that burden on Caitlin's lap and gives us a point of contact between the MOPS and Virtual Virginia and the individual schools and even students and families. And so we hope to expand this into other areas in the future. Obviously, we're going to take it one step at a time and just deal with the regional virtual academy now. But we see that we know in Southwest Virginia and all over rural Virginia that together we're stronger, and by coming together like this, it has really opened up a lot of doors to us that wouldn't be opened otherwise. And so we're not only excited about the regional academy and the power that it potentially possesses, but we're just so excited about other potential things that we're unaware of at this time. And so that's to me, I think that's the exciting part about this regional virtual academy.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Because certainly other jurisdictions just go ahead and do this individually. So basically what you're saying is the accountability piece is what's important. How many students do you expect to run through this, and what do you think the profile of those students is?
Well, so I can speak for Bristol. We anticipate having about 15% of our students. Currently, we have about 25% of our students who are still choosing to learn virtually. Based on surveys, we anticipate maybe half of those wanting to stay in that environment. And for the most part, it is for the students that are wanting to do it they still have health concerns in their home. They're afraid that the child may get the virus and bring it back into the home. But one other additional benefit that we think may occur from this, and we've already had some inquiries, is students who are choosing the homeschool route may decide to come back to public school if they have this virtual option. And as a matter of fact, in Bristol, we're actually recruiting to that end to try to get some of those families back. And so I don't, to what that's going to look like in other school divisions, we're not sure. But, out of the 30% or the 25% that we still have in learning remotely, half of those are doing very well, and half of those are struggling some. And we're going to have to work really hard to make sure that they're engaged, regardless of what environment they're in.
And if I may add too, we've sent out a survey already to our community and have about 1,000. And of course, we're really, really small, 1,600 students, but we've had about 1,000 responses, and 10 to 11% of our students are choosing to be remote next year. And Caitlin has also sent a survey to all of the consortium members right now. And so we're gathering that data. This year, we had about 15,000 virtual learners in Region 7. I don't expect that we're going to have that many, but also talking with Brian and Suzanne at Stride and Howard at Edgenuity, their registrations for online learning is up significantly. So I think whoever it was that said it's going to be, that the virtual is here to stay is definitely true.
And can I ask one more question before you, if that's okay? How do the financial incentives work here? In other words, does the division make money as you put more kids into virtual?
Actually,
what's the benefit from the state to the locals, and then what's the cost going out? I'd asked originally, I guess 2 weeks ago, for a budget of how this works, and we got a planning budget, but not really an operational budget for this.
Right. And so it's going to work different for every school division. For example, Bristol, our locality barely gives above the required local effort. And so we don't have the same opportunities that other divisions will with MOPS to bring in students from outside our division. And so for us, we will pay, whatever the per student cost is for students who want to go into the virtual environment. And then in year 1 and year 2, we will use our ESSER funds or our CARES Act funding to offset the cost to keep our staff in place. But as this process moves forward and we see the impact that it has, we will probably absorb some teaching positions through attrition as a result of that. But in the meantime, for the first couple of years, as we try to work on unfinished learning, we anticipate for the first couple of years that our class sizes will be positively affected in the in-person world, because where we have the students that are going to the virtual academy, that will make those class size smaller and give our in-person learners more individualized attention. And so for us, from that standpoint, we will actually lose a little bit of our state aid, because we'll be, paying for the virtual classes, but we'll backfill with that with our ESSER funds. It'll look different in every school division.
Will there be an effort going forward? It's a bad echo somewhere. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Graham. Will there be an effort going forward to bring kids back into the classroom? Everything we've seen so far seems to indicate that it's a better environment.
Absolutely.
And when I hear you talk about years of running this, and like I said, it is here to stay, but the question is at what level? I'm not sure it's going to become the preferred provision method for Virginia.
And I'll speak to that a little bit. Our enrollment and eligibility criteria is more strict than lenient, because we do want students to participate in the academy if that's their least restrictive environment, if that's an environment that they're successful in. And so while obviously COVID is still at play to a degree, we've set that enrollment criteria such that, if that environment is not working for that student, they will return to that in-person setting, which, like you said, we do know there's significant research on that being a positive, having an in-person teacher as well. So while it is an option and we've set this criteria in place, we do want only those students who are successful in that environment to continue in that method.
Okay, and how many people from outside the region do you expect to be enrolled in the Joint Academy?
It's a great question.
I'll take that. So you're saying non-resident students? Is that what you're saying, President Gecker? So we're expecting to have around 5,000 non-resident students. And just to be transparent with you, because I think you all need to know this, there is for one of the organizations, there's a 5.5 administrative fee for every non-resident students that Bradford City is able to take those. Edgenuity is providing a higher percent than that. And for example, this year we at the March 31st ADM report, we had 715 non-resident students, which ended up being about close to $250,000 for us, which really helped us. And I know Hold Harmless would have helped us too, but I didn't know that when we first signed on with them. But that $250,000 has helped with we in the beginning of the year, we had lost 80 students, and for a school division with 1,600, that really is about, it's about $500,000 that we would have lost in ADM. And on top of that, losing those students, we want them here in Radford. We want them in our public schools, because we know how important, like you just said, in-person learning is the research shows that that's the best type of learning that we can have, especially with effective teachers.
Okay, I know. Thank you very much for that answer. Ms. Holton, you had started to talk when I cut you off a little bit, so you're okay. All right. Anybody else? Dr. Duran.
Thank you. I was just going to make a comment as what was being said. I think that it's important to think long-term for distance learning, to almost think about next year separate from the bigger long-term vision of what it will look like, because that for many families, they are going to want to have next year distance learning for safety and health reasons. They're waiting for a vaccine. And then there is a subset of parents, though, who have found this year to be a much more effective way for their students. So we've seen students, for example, with anxiety or social emotional disorders and things of that nature, who have been thriving very well this year. So it's a smaller subset. And actually, there has been some research and discussion around that for those students having a distance learning as a preferred opportunity for them to learn. So we have to look at all students. So I know that, for example, in many divisions, I know in my division, as we're providing this option for families, we're actually asking them that question. If they're choosing to want to be in virtual, we're asking them why. Is it because of a preferred learning? Is it because of health and safety concerns of COVID? Or is it that you're wanting to do this until your child has a vaccine? So we're really trying to get that data. And I think that would be good to get more of that data across the Commonwealth for next year. Of why are families participating in virtual learning next year? And then for that subset who are really participating in it because of it's a preferred learning experience and it actually helps their children be successful, I think we need to think about that long term, because across the Commonwealth, I don't think we have that as a focus for some of those students. I've seen some other states that have before COVID even, been looking at students who have the preferred learning being in distance. So I hope we'll take advantage of that long term, while also understanding that next year is still, we're still in a pandemic, we're still coming out of it. There's still a lot of concern about what that looks like. There's many communities who have been affected by COVID disproportionately than others, who do not feel comfortable being yet, who many of them maybe don't even have access to health insurance and are fearful of getting that, and no family members who have been impacted or even passed away in some cases. So there's a variety of fears that are still going on right now. And how do we manage and help families through that next year, while also thinking long-term, what could distance learning look like for those other subset of students who it really truly is a better experience for them in that way. I just wanted to comment on that. And thank you, Dr. Peregrine, for your leadership on that.
Dr. Wilson?
Thank you. Dr. Graham, your comment about the business model has me thinking, and this is not to get deep into the weeds of the business model. However, just as an observation, with the eventual enrollment of non-resident students and the way that grows, you are seeking to do this for the benefit, of course, of the 17 school divisions in your region. But depending on how the business model then begins to grow, right, ripple out, those providers may find themselves in a position of competing interest, if you will. And so ensuring that we keep our eye on Region 7 students in Virginia and not the 5,000 or whatever number of non-resident students, I think will be something that certainly your board and individual school divisions will have to keep an eye on. And as we get back to the issues of admissions criteria, accessibility, achievement, teacher quality, all of those things, ensuring that your divisions drive for, in the spirit of our goals here in Virginia, just the business model makes me think about all of those details. So just a comment, not necessarily looking for a response, but just letting you know kind of what's going on in my head as I hear a bit more about the business model. So thank you.
I really appreciate that. Those are good comments, and those are something that we have certainly discussed here too. And all of my colleagues, all the superintendent colleagues in Region 7 accuse me of stealing their students, in Region 7. And I can assure you that's not what we're trying to do. We're really trying to help as many children as we can. So Dr. Wilson, I really appreciate that comment.
And I appreciate the board's work as we tie this all back together on trying to get our SOQs fully funded, because when that happens, the need to bring in outside students as a business model goes away, and we can actually fund public education with the dollars that are there or should be there to fund the standards of quality.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Holton?
Yes, sorry, but I do, and Dr. Wilson got at this a little bit, but I'm now understanding this differently. If you're serving 1,500 of your students but maybe 5,000 non-resident students, I would hope that we could learn from your experience if you are monitoring outcomes for all of those students. And if you're, and I should know better how the non-resident student model currently works, and I don't know that, but I hope you're working with those students to make sure someone is providing the counseling services and all the support services, and that you, since you're responsible for this group, for this endeavor, are making sure the outcomes are there for everybody. And not just for your resident students. So, and we'll learn from your experience in ways that will help inform others' efforts in this regard. So don't let the tail be wet. If there's a tail and a dog, anyway, we want you to take care of both 5,000 students, not just 1,500.
Thank you. And if I can just give you an example of what we have done this year with our children that are non-residents that have IEPs. We actually put them on our caseload and are responsible for providing them with the services that they require. So we've had meetings with those and know when their eligibilities are, know when we need to renew their IEPs. We've kept close contact with that, and that's what we intend to do with our non-resident students too. And again, I don't have the experience with Edgenuity. I do with Stride, but I meet with them almost weekly and talk about our non-resident students and how they're doing. So I appreciate that comment, Ms. Holton. Thank you.
Okay, I guess at this point, the board will accept this for first review. We'll see you guys in June. Thank you very much for being with us today. I look forward to my next visit to Region 7. I'll tell you, it was fun last time I was down there. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Okay, item I, Ms. Malik.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay.
It's all right. You had me wondering if I had it right or not. I was gonna.
Nope, you had it perfect. I'll let Emily, I think, is going to start the presentation, but I'll go ahead and start. Good morning, President Gecker.
Go ahead and start, Julie. I'm trying to get it pulled up. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on.
That's okay. I can double task too if you need me to. So good morning, President Gecker, Vice President Wilson, Dr. Lane, and members of the board. I may have to pause in a moment, but I'm just going to keep going for the time being. I'm here today to discuss a proposed waiver from certain accountability and reporting requirements under the Every Student Succeeds Act. And at this point, I am going to, Emily, I'm just going to go ahead.
Julie,
Yeah.
if you're able, go ahead and share your screen. I'm so sorry.
Sure.
Same problem as the other day. I'm not seeing it, but let me see if I can get it working.
Yeah, no problem. Hold on just a minute. Well, I'm having a similar problem. Let's see. I lost my controls.
Let me try to make you a co-host here. Give me 1 second. Give that a shot.
All right. I
Hold up.
think we're good.
All right, Julie, I think we're good to go now. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Now it stopped. Hold on.
I was moving forward. I think you can see my screen now, perhaps.
Julie, we have Emily's screen up. You're good to go.
Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So as a reminder, the impetus of this request is from the 2020-2021 school year waiver that was distributed and approved by the U.S. Department of Education. This waiver canceled federal assessments for the year and had implications on federal identifications. And canceled a lot of the federal reporting as required for assessment. Just a note, the first requirement does impact growth calculations for this year. We also wanted to explain that even though the federal identification requirements were paused for the 2020-2021 school year, those identifications were carried over from the 2019-2020 school year as per the waiver. So those schools continue to use services and resources this year off of the identifications from 2019-2020. Next slide, please. Okay, this may sound very familiar to you because back in January, I came before this board and presented the flexibilities and waivers available at that time. If you recall, this was through an addendum and a waiver process. This waiver and addendum process was aimed at 2 items. 1, adjusting the measures of interim progress schools were expected to meet in the 2020-2021 school year. Essentially, we were planning to adopt the targets that were set for the 2019-2020 school year. But with the absence of assessment, we were going to move those targets to the expectations for the 2020-2021 school year. Also, the addendum and waiver process proposed shifting federal identification of schools by 1 year, thus not identifying schools again until the fall of 2020 or 2022, sorry. Soon after that meeting with you in March, the USCD sent out a new set of waivers that they would consider through a federally developed template. These are the waivers that I'm going to present to you today. Next slide, please. The new waiver request was outlined for the board at your March board meeting by way of a report to the board. Soon after the March board meeting, this item was presented to stakeholders for public comment. That public comment period expired yesterday. So you will find public comments received prior to the board book being produced as an attachment to today's board item. Comments received from April 10th through last night were provided to you this morning in a supplemental document. They include a meeting of the Virginia Committee of Practitioners and a presentation at the Principals Conference conducted by the Office of School Quality, as well as a few other comments that were received in the past couple of weeks. Just a summary of those items. All comments and feedback received during the last 11 days were in favor of submitting the waiver, in case you haven't had an opportunity to fully review that document. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, these waivers include accountability and reporting waivers. So let's first review the accountability waivers. The first waiver that we would be seeking asks us to, again, delay the identification of CSI, TSI, and ATSI schools based on 2020-2021 data. So that is very similar to the addendum in the waiver process that was presented in January, that we would not identify schools in the fall of 2021. The second item requests a waiver to the requirement that states measure a school's progress toward the measures of interim progress. As stated before, the addendum and waiver just sought to shift, but we still had targets for the 2020-2021 data. This waiver would remove those targets for the 2020-21 data, and the measurements and the data accumulated this year would not be compared to those targets. And also a waiver on how participation rate would be used for assessments administered in the 2020-2021 school year. So those are the 3 requested waivers. Often when we work with USCD, along with the waivers, with the acceptance of the waiver, they offer states must make certain assurances. So if these accountability waivers were accepted and approved, we would have to ensure that the federal identifications of CSI, TSI, and ATSI would again be extended and maintained for the 2021-2022 school year with all supports, or with appropriate supports and interventions taking place during that year. We would also have to assure that this is, at this time, the last time that we would delay those identifications, so that those identifications would resume in the fall of 2022 using data from 21-22. Next slide, please, Emily. Now, the requested reporting waivers look a little bit different. In March of last year, pretty much anything that had to do with assessment or accountability, we did not need to report. Well, the waiver opportunities in this waiver package waives the requirement for growth, because again, there's an issue with canceling spring 2020 data that does not allow us to measure growth according to our ESSA plan. Also, we would not need to report accreditation ratings. Once again, those accreditation ratings are waived again for the 2021-2022 school year, so we wouldn't have those. And also, we would not have to report school progress toward the measures of interim progress and long-term goals. However, those accountability requirements would be waived, but there are accountability requirements that must be maintained if the waiver is improved, and that includes a report, publicly available report on achievement in reading, math, and science off of this year, a report on participation rates, a report on federal graduation rates, on English learner progress toward English language attainment, and chronic absenteeism rates. Those are the items that are not to be waived. Next slide, please. And the assurance to go along with the reporting waivers states that receive this waiver must, to the largest extent possible, report on student and educator access to technology devices and high-speed internet at home. Unfortunately, the Office of Data Services was proactive, and we are collecting this information at the student level. So the student level information would need to be reported if this waiver were approved by the USED. If the board approves, the VDOE would submit the waiver to the USED as soon as possible. Therefore, the Superintendent of Public Instruction recommends the Board of Education waive first review and approve the waiver request for submission to the United States Department of Education. President Gecker, at this time, I would be happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions by board members? I don't see any. Is there a motion to waive first review and request the waiver?
So move, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Is there a second?
Second, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Vaught. By roll call, Dr. Wilson,
Aye.
Ms. Davis-Vaught,
Aye.
Dr. Duran,
Aye.
Ms. Holton,
Aye.
Dr. Mann,
Aye.
Dr. Pexton,
Aye.
Mr. Swan,
Aye.
and I vote aye. Okay, we're at about an hour and change into this, and we've got I guess a chunk coming up that might be harder to break through. I'm going to propose a 10-minute break, if that's okay with everybody, and we'll see you all at 11:20. Is that okay? Perfect. Okay, we're almost back. Dr. Pexton and Ms. Davis-Vaught? Not quite.
She does need just a couple more minutes. I think we can.
That's
We
fine.
can probably go ahead and get started and not pop up for another couple minutes.
No, that's fine.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I guess we will move on to item J, first review of revised guidelines for practice year 1 of the Early Childhood Unified Measurement and Improvement System. Our favorite Chief School Readiness Officer, Jenna Conway, back with us again. Good to see you a couple of days in a row.
This is true, Mr. Gecker. I should note I'm the only Chief School Readiness Officer, so it's being favored. It's not a difficult task, but I will take it. I will take it.
Not like deputy superintendents, I'll tell you, when there's many of those.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Well, good morning, Mr. Gecker, Superintendent Lane, and members of the board. I am pleased, along with Ms. Carroll and Ms. Myers, to present to you all this morning the guidelines for practice year 1 of the Early Childhood Unified Measurement and Improvement System. I'd like to take you through a few slides that provide an overview. You also have the guidelines document. It's roughly 74 pages that in thorough and comprehensive detail goes through aspects of the why, the what, and the how, with a real focus on improvement. And as discussed in part yesterday, a focus on the implementation. So how we will work with providers across the sector in the Commonwealth to support this implementation in practice year 1. Emily, if we can move to the next slide, please. As always, and I know you all are familiar and probably think I'm a little bit of a broken record here, but want to start with the why and what we are trying to achieve together. So as we discussed in part yesterday, and I know you've heard me come back to you and share information about this over the last year or so, we know our current early childhood system does not offer every child in the Commonwealth equitable opportunity. And we know that early childhood can work. There is an extensive research base. We heard from some colleagues yesterday on this point, but too many families and children in the Commonwealth lack access to these experiences. We also know when we put on our equity lens that our system too often fails to prepare children who are Black, Hispanic, speak a language other than English at home, or have a diagnosed disability or developmental delay. And so our proposal today really is a step, and it's a key piece. And I think, as Ms. Davis-Vaught noted yesterday, access is another essential part of that, but really thinking about quality teaching and learning and how we can, as a board and as a department, support that across the sector. There'll be a theme to the content today, and you'll see throughout the document that together we must unify, right, come up with a common expectation or true north on what we want for all children across our programs, Family Day Home, childcare, Head Start, and school-based programs. Think about measuring, the kind of most important elements, what matters most, because we know what is measured is what is paid attention to, and then really making sure that we are reorganizing our system based on what we're learning to support improvement. So it's sort of similar to what we've talked about with the efforts around accreditation, but really making sure that this is a measurement and improvement system where the focus is on supporting every educator so that he or she is best positioned to support the learning and development of each unique child in the Commonwealth. We will also note, before we move on to the next slide, that the priority is for those who need it most. And I think that's a shift from this system, which was fragmented and fairly siloed, to one where a lot of the measurement and professional development was focused on who sought it out rather than who might need it most. And that's a pretty pivotal shift for the board and for our work. Emily, if you move to the next slide. I should note, and I promise I won't read every word on this screen, that this work builds on years of efforts around kind of thinking about quality measurement improvement at the national level, and then here in the Commonwealth. And a lot of it, in order, we think, to be successful in implementing, we need to be building or basing our work on what is happening on the ground in the Commonwealth. And so the document today, and part of the reason for its length and its comprehensiveness, is that it is rooted in the experiences of actual educators across the sector over the course of the last few years, with the culminating piece being the Early Childhood Unification Law that was passed and signed into law last year, and that then requires this board, if we can move to the next slide, to adopt a uniform quality measurement and improvement system. So here is what is required of the board. So July of last year, this law, and you've heard me talk about the kind of key aspects of the law, it required moving the oversight of everything related to early childhood. So we've talked about the regulations that were on consent review this morning. It required the creation of the Early Childhood Advisory Committee, which we came to you all in January with that incredible membership of duly representative stakeholders from across the state. And it requires the creation of a unified measurement and improvement system. It calls you to establish it by July of this year, which starts with these guidelines for first review today and then final review in June. But it's very clear that there should be at least 2 practice years. And so what we're talking about today is the guidelines for practice year 1. These 2 practice years are really in response to the global pandemic and the kind of the impact that it has had on the early childhood sector. So initially the law only called for 1 practice year, but we worked very closely with the governor's office to make sure that we could allow for additional flexibility. By fall of 2023, all publicly funded programs will be required to participate, with the goal being that the measurements would be shared in the fall of 2024. And so you would, once we have these 2 practice years, we will get on a cycle that is similar to that of accreditation, where we gather the data over the course of the year and then put out the results in the following fall. I should note that the law is very clear that this would include publicly funded programs, and that's defined in your guidelines, but that's basically any program that takes a public dollar to serve children. So it's not the food and nutrition program, but really focused on the child care subsidy program, which is a voucher that families can use to obtain childcare, whether in a family day home or in a child care center or a faith-based setting. It includes Head Start and Early Head Start, and it includes any early childhood programming, Virginia Preschool Initiative, Title I, Early Childhood Special Education located in our public schools. And that's covered in detail in the guidelines. We have also, as part of our broader efforts, and you'll notice throughout today, as we're trying to make sure that everybody is aware of this, have put together quite a bit of content on our website so that we can make sure that people know and are kind of aware as we're building this system. Emily, next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'm just going to highlight what is in the guidelines document, and it really provides an overview. It provides kind of the legal requirement, who's in, who's out, and then it goes into detail on what will be measured, and then kind of how we're supporting improvement. So I'll speak first to what will be measured. After looking at both what was happening nationally, consulting with outside experts, and then focusing in on what was occurring on the ground in Virginia, our proposal is that we focus on 2 nationally recognized indicators of quality teaching and learning that can be measured in all of our early childhood settings. The first of which is interactions, which we know is a very strong predictor of child outcomes. And we're proposing that we use the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, or the CLAS, which I know we talked a little bit about yesterday. It's developmentally appropriate. It was designed for infants, toddlers, and preschooler classrooms. It goes to K-12 as well, but we would focus here on those younger ages. And we are proposing that we look at the use of curriculum, with this idea being that we know that our educators need support on thinking about intentionally what activities, what content, how to think about their days with infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. We think these are the 2, when we talk about our guiding principles, sort of the 2 most important indicators that can be measured at scale and can be we can get buy-in from educators and that are movable, I think, as Dr. Basak and others talked about yesterday, and that these go hand in hand together. If we can support stimulating interactions that are warm and responsive, and we can support educators to be intentional about how they help children learn and grow in an age-appropriate way. An infant curriculum, as you might imagine, looks pretty different from preschool curriculum, that we can ultimately help and promote school readiness across the board in a way that is equitable and culturally responsive to all of our littlest learners. Next slide, please. This gives a little bit of the detail on kind of how we went from looking at all of the different ways in which a state might measure quality down to the focus on 2. And this kind of gives you our top 5 or top 4 rationale. I think kind of the key ones I'll highlight from you. One is that this can be used in all settings, and if provided the right supports, can be used equitably in all settings. 2, there are very strong correlations with promoting child outcomes, and really kind of that's critically important. 3, these are materials that have been used in Virginia on the ground, and so that increases our likelihood of being successful and implementation. And then I think 4 is across these 2, really being thoughtful about the diversity of both our program settings. As I talked a little bit about yesterday, this is different from K-12 in many aspects in terms of who's providing these education and care services. The constituency we tend to serve those kids who are furthest from opportunity, and being very thoughtful about how we are both culturally and linguistically responsive to these children and to their families is really critical. And for those collected reasons, these are kind of why we think these are the 2 most important things to measure. Next slide, please. We also landed on these 2 measures because we believe that we want to structure a system. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we'll provide resources to ensure the success here, but at its core, to make sure that the system was structured to support improvement. And a lot of that hinges on making sure that we build a system that gets information and supports down to the classroom level. And that is a huge undertaking in terms of kind of quite different from how a lot of these systems right now work. A lot of the professional development systems are kind of come as you go, if requested, tend to be a little bit more ad hoc. Sometimes we use samples of classrooms, so we're not really focused on getting to every educator in every classroom every year, but we sort of say we can generally get an understanding of what's happening in a program by observing, half of the classrooms every 2 years or every 3 years. And that might be mathematically true, right? That might actually be an indicator of what's going on in that program, but that is not as useful for every educator. When you think about kind of every educator deserves feedback, each child is individual. And we have a lot of turnover, right? And so we have to sort of really be kind of paying attention on a more specific basis. So our system is designed to make sure that every educator receives feedback and then also receives aligned supports to improve their practice, that it's a strengths-based system saying, here's what you're doing well, and that we are then aligning all of the millions of dollars that we expend on resources to make sure it meets their unique needs. We want to empower program leaders. This is really important, but they also have that same information. We're all working from the same sheet of music, and they have the data and the information and the support to improve, and that this entire ecosystem, and this is that we bring all of these fragmented providers together, those that support professional development, coaching, training, that they too understand what we are measuring, why it matters, and that we're aligning these improvement efforts. And then once we look at all of that information and that data, how do we make sure that we prioritize those that are furthest from opportunity, least likely to receive the support? I also note the law calls for really thinking about incentives for the system. And one of the really important pieces that we are tackling is that we know that you can make a lot of investment in professional development and coaching and supports, but if 40% of your educators leave the classroom every year, that investment walks out the door. And so one of the things that Virginia has attached with its efforts around piloting over the last few years is a $1,500 annual direct to educator incentive. It is focused on educators who are not employed by school systems, so our family day home and childcare educators in programs that take our public dollars. And we've seen already an impact in reducing turnover. I should also note, thanks to some of the COVID relief funding and knowing the extreme hardships faced by these educators, we were able to increase this amount to $2,000 this year. So all educators who are receiving this incentive will receive $2,000, and we have committed to any educator who is not employed by a school system who works, as part of the practice year next year, will receive an educator incentive of at least $1,500 simply for being part of this. So this is not based on the credential of the educator, not based on sort of hitting a certain performance level. This is simply based on being part of the practice year and kind of trying to kind of address this turnover issue while also recognizing that this is a pretty significant shift for some of our educators who may never have been part of something like this before. Next slide, please. So in the proposal, we also talk in a little bit more detail about how we will look at results for year one. And we basically are going to take, as I said before, we are going to fund communities to observe all classrooms twice a year using this class system of measures. And there's an infant version, there's a toddler version, there's a preschool version. They're about a 90-minute observation, various cycles, and they look at everything from warmth and responsiveness, so the emotional climate of the room, how well it's organized, how the educators support the behaviors in the classroom, and in an age-appropriate way, what kind of instruction looks like. It can be used with any curricular material. It really kind of is a more abstract measure of kind of supporting critical thinking skills, use of language. We will then take all of that data from all of the classrooms and then kind of average that together. So if you have infant and toddler classrooms, it would include both. If you're just preschool, it's just preschool. We will then also look at whether you're using approved curriculum in at least one classroom. And when we look at the current landscape of where curriculum is being used, it's a little noisy, but we are hesitant to require that across the board. We really want to kind of start small and support the field to make sure that in at least one of their classrooms in the beginning that they're using an approved curriculum. And for doing that, they will receive 100 out of 100 points as part of their score. We will then add up those interactions points and those curriculum points, and that will be your total score. We have to have a rating as required by the law, and we have gone back and forth on this. We initially, when we took this to the Early Childhood Advisory Committee, had exemplary, satisfactory, and needs improvement. And folks felt like that just didn't seem appropriate with the context of a practice year, with the kind of the size of this group, and really what we were wanting to achieve, which was kind of information for all programs, but not having this rating that felt like it could imply more than that. So we have revised those based on feedback, and if we have our programs that we think really need to be prioritized for supports, instead of saying they need improvement, saying what they need to do is to be supported, right, and kind of identifying that. For a group that in the middle that really meets our expectations for the practice year, just saying that directly. And then for those subset of classrooms and programs that are just, have made incredible investments in quality over the past year and really can serve as models for programs across the state, noting that they are doing exceptionally well and that they exceed our practice year expectations. So again, a shift in real time based on our feedback from the field and folks who are doing this work as part of the pilot. Next slide, please. So let's talk for a little bit about the improvement question. And as I noted yesterday, Dr. Duran, I promised though that I would come back to this. But the really thinking about how we're structured to support improvement, and then I'll talk in a second about direct resources there. So these are practice year's results. We would not share these with anybody, but our real goal is to build a system across those communities that receive funding to do this work in practice year one, so that first off, everybody understands what is being measured and why. We then have a systematic effort, and all of the communities that are participating receive funds to make sure that they can build the capacity to have these certified observers. So as we said before, it's a national certification, a 2-day training, and then you have to pass a test in which you observe videos and demonstrate that you are reliable to a certain degree. And so really making sure that we have enough capacity to get those observations done and that those observations are happening in the fall and spring. As a condition of the dollars that go out to the communities, being very clear that it's not just about getting the observation done, but that all of the educators in the classroom need to receive feedback with a focus first on strengths. And we've done a lot of technical assistance and professional development on giving feedback, and there'll be more of that to come, but making sure that we're helping educators understand first their strengths and then their opportunities from growth. Then working with the field around, well, how do you take that information and what do you do with it? And how do you sort of say, let's build on your strengths, let's identify the areas for growth and how we can support that. And we're working very intensively right now with an array of providers across the state that we fund to do professional development to align that. And then we will get the fall data, we will get the spring data, we'll take a kind of an equity approach to the analysis there. We'll look at sort of who's doing well, who's struggling, how we have used our improvement resources to support programs where we have done that well, where there are gaps, and we will come back to you next spring with potentially any shifts to the guidelines for practice year 2. And then we'll do the same in practice year 2, come back to you again. So trying to have this cycle of continual improvement at the state level, at the local level, and down to the program level. Next slide, please. I want to kind of come back to the slide that the colleagues presented yesterday, just on the kind of, again, importance of recognizing that, we know our educators are finding this useful. And I think as we think about the practice year, it is, again, opt-in. And also talk in a second ago, we're really making sure that we're prioritizing resources to support our communities, our program leaders, and our educators next year. We do think that there is promise in us being able to work with the field so that they truly can find this to be a measurement and improvement system that benefits. My ideal for this is that a few years now we'll reflect back and educators remember this as, for many times, the first time that they received feedback. They also received a direct incentive, right, that just recognized them for being in the classroom and for some of the new tasks that were put in front of them, and they see how this can benefit kids. And again, I had that powerful experience of being able to observe that on the ground in Louisiana. And I think this initial data that Dr. Bisak shared yesterday suggests as such. I want to note that the question came up yesterday about, what about some of the programs that haven't benefited from this in the past? How do they feel about this? And just to note that the dark orange and the light orange bars are our child care centers and our family day homes that are participating in the preschool development grant. This is 2,000 educators from across the state. And they found that it was useful to focus on class even during COVID. We, in fact, think that their numbers, right, so 83% of them and 85% of them thought that was useful, are higher potentially than schools and Head Start because they've had to be in person, right? And they just recognize the importance of these interactions, particularly when our kids and our educators are facing an upside down world. So I wanted to put this back in front of you, noting that I think to the questions raised about implementation, that we will continue to do this survey and continue to really ask that question of our educators, because if it's not useful for them, then we know we're not going to get buy-in around change, and we know it's not going to be actually helping their practice, and that's what we have to kind of center in this work. So we think this is a good start. I'd like to see those numbers higher, right, like above 90% across the board, right, that they think interactions are important, that they understand what is being measured and why, and that they think that this focus is useful for them. Because if it's useful for them, we know that it then means that they are really using it in support of their children's learning and development. Next slide, please. So the key piece on the implementation, and there's sort of two aspects that I wanted to note here to some of the points raised yesterday, Dr. Duran. I think, one, we need to resource this, like we need to put real dollars towards supporting this to happen. And so we are directly funding our communities to build relationships, to conduct these observations. We look at the number of classrooms they have and we fund them based on that, and to support educators, right? And then are kind of providing TA to those communities, measuring every step of the way through Link B5, able to kind of see, all right, are the observations happening or not? Are educators satisfied or not through the survey? So really putting resources, real resources in terms of dollars and staff towards that. We also recognize that quality is not just a function of like what you pay your consultants and your professional development, but actually what you pay your programs directly. And so we were very pleased to have a higher Virginia Preschool Initiative rate. We have increased the rate for mixed delivery this year going forward. And I think in partnership with you, we will come back and continue to look at raising the rates, the child care subsidy program, really in recognition, as Dr. Mann and others have noted, that we need to be funding programs to meet these health, safety, and quality expectations. Those rates were increased a year and a half ago, but we're still hearing from the field pretty directly that they are insufficient as it relates to the actual cost of providing care and education. We currently expend just under $20 million only directly on improvement. So these are not dollars towards slots. There's an appendix of all of this too in the document at the end. But making sure that we are aligning those resources and we are taking the data and prioritizing those who need it most. So one example is we have a mental health consultation program. We will be using some of the federal funding to expand that next year and looking specifically at those programs that, based on initial observations, might need support, and supporting that's an intensive coaching intervention where you go in, you work with the director, you work with the educators, you talk about the children whose behaviors the educators are finding challenging, really kind of in a long evidence base, and that it helps change day-to-day practice for educators, for kids, and for programs. Similarly, we'll be looking at direct investments in curriculum. First, understanding what people are using. We don't want people to switch if they're using something that's quality, reviewing curriculum materials, and then making sure that curriculum is not unaffordable to programs. And then lastly, you heard me talk about this before, but this incentive directly to our educators. Next slide, please, Emily. So lastly, just in terms of the engagement, and then I'd love to open it up for questions. So as required by law, we now take anything that we are going to bring to you to our Early Childhood Advisory Committee in advance. We did, after an incredible 3-hour meeting, receive an endorsement with 3 recommendations from the Early Childhood Advisory Committee, all of which are reflected in your document. So the first of which is they asked for families to be considered as a guiding principle. And so we added the 7th guiding principle around that, making sure that this system serves as a resource for families, right? That sort of recognizes the cultural and linguistic diversity of our families, is useful to them, and includes them as kind of key stakeholders as well. The second was that we needed to really strengthen our improvement section. And so there was a much longer section looking at all the current improvement resources, how they'll be aligned, and noting explicitly that we prioritize our family day homes and our childcare programs that often have been under-resourced in the past. That's really page 51 onwards. And then lastly, looking really specifically at inclusion. We have an incredible teacher from our public schools who talked about he actually teaches in an inclusion classroom and was concerned about the extent to which we're looking at some of those inclusive practices. And so we'll pilot this year using a specific measure along with the class to look at those interactions. And that will help us get better data on the extent to which we need to go beyond the class when we're thinking about inclusionary classrooms. We also did an online survey with the full document. And again, this chart just captures some of the strengths and the questions and concerns, many of which we tried to address, between the feedback and between the advisory committee. But I think the key things are some of the things that came up yesterday. How do we make sure we communicate this effectively? How do we not recreate the wheel, but build on existing partnerships? How do we prioritize our family day home providers? How do we think about work in other languages? And then I think continuing to make sure that there's not a cost, right? This is not a pay to play system, but that we are using particularly the federal dollars to address those costs so that it truly is a more level playing field for our providers. With that, let me pause there and see what questions they have. If not, the superintendent would recommend that the Board of Education receive for first review the guidelines for practice year 1 of the Early Childhood Unified Measurement and Improvement System.
Well, thank you for the complete presentation. Are there any questions? Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. Jenna, thanks for the presentation. Just a quick question, the reference to the cost for class. I don't recall seeing that, and I don't know that it came up in our work session on Wednesday. So what is that cost, generally speaking?
Yeah, so it varies, Dr. Wilson. So there's a cost to kind of get an observer trained, right? And depending on kind of how many observers, and that's fairly expensive. It kind of can range from just under $1,000 to slightly over that, depending on if you do that individually or you do that as a group. That is not for every teacher, and that may not even be for every leader. That's just at the kind of community level. And then the additional cost is that it often sort of costs for somebody to do an observation. It just takes time. So once you're trained as an observer, you don't have to pay every time, but it does take your time. So we fund to the degree of several $100s per classroom to get all of these done. And that is funded to the community level. So there should not be any kind of out-of-pocket cost for an individual program.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr.
I
Swan?
think Mr. Swan.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. Just a quick question. Will the teachers within these early childhood settings have to be highly qualified as if they were in a regular school building?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we've tried to be very thoughtful about is, there are different credential or qualification requirements across these settings. And so there, for instance, you do not have to have a bachelor's degree and a Virginia teaching license if you teach in a childcare center or in a family day home, right? Which is a difference from what is required in a school program if you're a school employee. Head Start has a separate set of requirements that come from the federal level. We looked at, and many systems, Mr. Swan, do include a credential requirement, right? And it looks both at like, do you have a license? And sometimes there's even kind of additional qualifications. And we purposely did not include that for two reasons. One is that does not reflect our current universe. Right now, we think about half of our family day home educators, for instance, do not have, only have a high school degree, right? And so to kind of require a bachelor's degree would put them out of business, right? Like they couldn't do that. The second is we were able to take the data from Virginia and look at interaction quality, right? So look at these nationally recognized observations of what was actually occurring in classrooms and credential. And what we saw is that it ranged. And so that there were individuals who could do an incredible job of providing high quality interactions to infants and toddlers, for example, and who also, who had a high school degree or who had an associate's degree, who had a child development associate. And so we would, and if we had put in, a credential requirement, it would have basically said, well, this group, would be considered lower quality, even though the actual interactions in those classrooms or in those settings would have been considered high quality. And so for that reason, we ruled that out as a requirement of this system. So it doesn't change any of the program requirements, like the sort of code still says, if you work in a school system, you have to have a teaching license. The federal law still says Head Start has to have this expectation, so it doesn't change that. But it does not include credential or qualification as part of this measurement and system because of what we found based on the Virginia data.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, thank you again, Jen. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Holton.
Thank you. Great work and great presentation, Jenna. The reduction in turnover, I'm curious, and that's focusing on that, this $1,500 per educator incentive, I think is a wonderful thing. Recognizing the low pay that childcare workers get, the turnover percentage is not surprising, but as you point out, it is absolutely crucial, not just because of professional development, but relationships, everything we know about child development, figuring out how to have lower those turnover rates is just, I'm curious if anything in your Louisiana experience tells us how to help reduce turnover. And I'm curious whether measuring turnover is something we should be adding on to a criteria, recognizing that turnover may be high, but are there things we can do to nudge it down and incentivize? And my guess is that some of the sectors have higher turnover than other sectors. And some of that's related to pay, but some of it may not be. So what can we do? What can we do about turnover in our measurement or otherwise?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. So let me start with the second question and then I'll come back to it. So we are measuring it. So part of what's unique about providing these incentives is that they require verification. So oftentimes when you look at turnover, you do a survey at the end of the year and you ask leaders how many folks left, right? And it's a ballpark, but that's why when asked, early childhood folks will say, oh, it's 40% or it's anywhere from 25 to 40%, which is a pretty big range. But we have very specific data because we cut checks to these educators, right? And so we are, Ms. Holton, be able to track this really specifically, and we will be able to kind of track both the kind of what we know about what's happening in classrooms to these turnover rates. We also, in aggregate, something that they have tracked in Louisiana and that we will also be able to track in Virginia is, are educators leaving to go to other settings, which could be promising, right? If somebody kind of gets a credential and wants to become, go into a sort of a place where they can make more money, like nobody wants to hold that against an educator. Unfortunately, what they found in Louisiana was our educators are not leaving to take higher up positions within the early child education system. They're leaving to go to Target or Walmart or Amazon, which is, paying $15 an hour and benefits start on day one, right? And so, but we will at least be able to track that and to be able to bring, more insights there. We learned in year one, we did actually provide incentives to school-based teachers, and we basically saw no impact, right? So while we saw, cut in half by turnover for family day homes and for childcare educators, we saw no impact for school-based programs. And so in year two and going forward, we're no longer providing those incentives so that we can actually provide more dollars to childcare and family day home educators. So that's a perfect example of measuring and then making adjustments based on where this is working.
So I'm sorry, can I interrupt? Did you say you did see an impact in the family day homes and the centers you saw a significant impact on turnover from the incentives in the pilot? Did I understand?
We did, yeah. So it went from it cut it in half, right? From I think it was 30% to 15% in childcare and family day homes. And we saw almost no effect in the schools, right? So, which is partly why we then in year two, stopped providing those incentives to the schools and provided. So, and this is to be clear, who your employer is, right? So we know we have some programs that are physically located in schools, but if you're whether you work for Head Start or VPI, if you are a school-based employee, we know that you generally make more money and you have full benefits. If you are located in a licensed childcare center or family day home, then we continue to provide the incentive because we saw such a positive effect in year one. And we are testing this year more frequent payments and also texting educators to help ensure that they understand what's going on. And then we are currently looking at potentially even increasing the funding over time as a way to ultimately, if you stay a second year or third year, do we increase the incentive? Largely to think we cannot make up the entire gap, right, between $10 and $12 an hour to, a sort of a livable wage and full benefits, but we think we can have an impact and we can get these dollars directly to educators. We did something similar in Louisiana with tax credits. The tax credits prior to rolling out the uniform system were solely focused on credential. So entry level was a CBA, associate's, bachelor's degree, and master's degree. And, the sort of a master's degree is often sort of unaffordable for many, many, many early childhood educators. So we switched it there to reward retention and have seen sort of some impact there in terms of really saying if you stay 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I will be candid. I think we need to do two things. I think we need to get dollars directly in the hands of educators, and we need to kind of increase the rate, right, so that programs can actually be supported and empowered to address the full costs. Nobody's making money at all in this sector, right? So it's kind of doing those both things, figuring out how we give programs enough, and in the interim, also making sure we get these dollars directly to educators and that we are doing that in a way that recognizes them, brings sort of more prestige and professionalism to their work, right? And as I think we talked a little bit about yesterday, this is the biggest change for them. I'm not sure there's a huge change for many of our VPI programs. They've been observed using these tools, for years now. But if we think about, and on top of the fact that our family day homes, right, 80 to 90% of them stayed open every day throughout this pandemic, really recognizing and supporting them throughout this is critically important.
If I may just briefly, that's really exciting to hear about the impact, and it's not so surprising that we would have more impact family day home and childcare centers because those educators are paid so much less. That $1,500 was a bigger hit, a bigger positive hit for them. So that's great to hear about the positive results. But my question is, what about adding this in as one of your, as part of your unified measurement and improvement system? And I guess that would, the question would depend a little bit
Yeah.
on whether you think the operators of these, of the childcare centers, et cetera, are they part of the solution on attracting and or on retention and turnover, or is it all just the dollars? In which case, the more direct incentives is the major part of the solution. But do you want to?
No, yeah.
Entities and give them points for reducing turnover.
So I will say we absolutely see them as like central, right? And that they're kind of, they not only are thinking about sort of who they're hiring, how they're supporting their educators, who's responsible for thinking about kind of professional development support, the walkthroughs they do, right? The leader is just the linchpin to kind of this idea of, supporting improvement in practice. And so we absolutely see them as essential. We've spent a lot of time looking at this data really carefully. I have both in Louisiana and here in these early stages, and we'd be hesitant to kind of attach retention directly to this. When we looked at the data in Louisiana, we saw an interesting trend where there were three groups, right, Ms. Holton? There was the group of leavers, right, the teachers that left. There were the stayers, and then there were the new teachers. And interestingly enough, as you might expect, the stayers did the best when you looked at interactions, right? When you looked at all their class scores across the board, infant, toddler, and preschool. But what happened over time in Louisiana is that those directors got better at hiring because the new entrants actually did better than the leavers, if you know what I'm saying. So there's like, you always want to be careful about retention because you don't, certainly 40% sort of turnover is terrible, but like there's some healthy turnover, right, in terms of kind of really thinking through who are the kind of folks who should be supportive. So we think that data was very promising. One, that those who stayed were getting supported over time to kind of get better and better. And two, that those leaders got better about thinking about who would fit there. So I think we'll continue to measure carefully, but I would be hesitant to kind of to have that entirely on the shoulders of the site leader. I think the other thing is if you talk to a site leader, they know, right, how you keep somebody. You pay them more, right? They just don't have the resources. And the only way to pay them more is to turn around and charge their families who are already struggling to kind of pay this, to charge them more, right? So we don't want to create a system that says the only way to do well is you gotta somehow generate more money, right? And again, that's this kind of idea of pay to play. So I'm not sure that's exactly the answer you look for. We will measure it very carefully. We will, when we can pay for it, do it, and we'll look at it, but we just don't want to sort of say to the site leader, like, you have to come up with more money in order to be successful in the system.
Makes total sense. Thank you.
Anybody else? I don't see anybody. So Jen, I'll thank you. And the board is happy to take this on first review. We look forward to seeing it again next month or in June. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you all.
All right, from early childhood to Legionella, sort of a weird transition. Item K, first review of guidelines for a water management program to prevent Legionella pneumophila growth in public school buildings. Somewhat reminiscent of the old Shark Commission, for those of you in Virginia politics long enough to remember that one. Ms. Holton, probably no. Look that one up. That one's worth looking up. The Shark Commission, Governor Gilmore. In any event, Mr. Dickey.
Thank you, President Gecker. Good morning, President Gecker, members of the board, and Dr. Lane. This item is first review of guidelines for a water management program to prevent Legionella pneumophila growth in public school buildings. And this is essentially developing a preventive maintenance program to guard against the risk of bacterial growth in major water systems that may be present in public school buildings, such as cooling towers, potable water, showers, a variety of standard water systems in public schools, if not properly maintained, are at risk of this type of bacterial growth. Senate Bill 410 from the 2020 session required DOE to make recommendations for establishing maintenance and validation of water management programs to prevent this kind of bacterial growth in public school building water systems. And we were required to develop recommendations by July 1, 2021. And these proposed guidelines before you today are intended to meet that legislative requirement. Senate Bill 410 also requires local school boards to have water management programs in place for their schools by July 1 as well. And these recommendations will help facilitate that. In creating the proposed guidelines, DOE has worked with Department of Health, Office of Drinking Water staff who have expertise in this area. We've also held discussions with industry representatives, and a strong component of the guidelines are the best practice references from the CDC, various other federal agencies, as well as the primary industry standards for water management programs from the primary industry group in this area. And that's the 188-2018 document that's referenced at the end of the guidelines. Really, that resource, as well as the CDC, are really the authoritative sources of information and guidance in this area. And it's a strong component of the draft guidelines we've put together. Today, the board is requested to waive first review and approve the proposed guidelines, and following board approval, the guidelines will be posted on the Virginia Regulatory Town Hall as required for the 30-day public comment period under the APA. After that 30-day period, any comments received will be reviewed and incorporated as appropriate in the final document. And we will make that public and communicate the final recommendations to school divisions by July 1. We're also planning, in conjunction with VDH staff, to conduct a technical assistance webinar for school divisions to review the final guidelines and review again with them the requirements of Senate Bill 410. And we want to get that done prior to July 1. The superintendent of public instruction recommends that the Board of Ed waive first review and approve the proposed guidelines for a water management program to prevent Legionella pneumophila growth in public school buildings. And I want to thank Vijay Ramnarain, who's Director of Support Services in DOE, for leading the effort to draft the guidelines and working with VDH staff in doing so. And VJ's on today with us as well, in case there are technical questions. Thanks, President Gecker.
Thank you so much. Any questions? None. I will say it is an artful way of saying just do your jobs to the localities. You made it seem very nice, so thank you for that, whoever did this drafting. It is always interesting for me to see, the tension between local control and state control, and how this one ended up somehow in our laps. I mean, this is if ever there were a purely local function, this is it. But we will do what we're asked to do. Is there a motion to waive first review and approve this?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson?
Aye.
Ms. Davis-Vaught? Oops. Dr. Duran?
Aye.
Ms. Holton?
Aye.
Dr. Mann?
Aye.
Dr. Paxton?
Aye.
Mr. Swan?
Aye.
Did I hear Ms. Davis-Vaught say aye?
Yes, sir. Aye.
Thank you, and chair votes aye. Thank you guys very much for being with us, and appreciate your work on that item.
Thanks very much.
Item L, First, review of revisions to the list of 2021-22 Board of Education approved industry certifications, occupational competency assessments, and professional licenses. Mr. Wilcox?
Good afternoon, President Gecker, members of the board, and Dr. Lane. As required by board regulations, the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education presents the additions to and deletions from the list of industry certifications, occupational competency assessments, and professional licenses to meet the requirements on pages C through H of the board agenda item. In summary, these industry credentials apply to students that entered the 9th grade prior to 2018-19 and to students that entered in school year 2018-19 and beyond. There are 3 key points I would point to pertaining to students that entered prior to 2018-19. These are students who must complete a CTE program sequence of courses and pass an industry credential, which may be used as a substitute for the industry verified credit, or 2, used either for a laboratory science or history and social science verified credit. Any one board approved certification will satisfy the standard diploma graduation requirement for the CTE credential. And 3rd, students pursuing the advanced studies diploma may utilize additional tests for earning verified credit in computer science, technology, career and technical education, economics, or other areas as prescribed by the board for verified credit. With respect to those students that entered the 9th grade in 2018-19 and beyond, a laboratory science verified credit may be awarded to students who complete a CTE sequence of courses and pass 2 approved industry recognized certification exams or professional licenses, or 1 of each certification and license. 2, in accordance to the standards of quality, students shall complete an advanced placement, honors, international baccalaureate, or dual enrollment course. 2, complete a high quality work-based learning experience as prescribed by the board guidance on work-based learning. Or 3, earn a career and technical education credential approved by the board. 3, students are eligible to earn Board of Education approved seals for career and technical education. And 4th, students may receive other seals or awards for exceptional academic, CTE, citizenship, or other exemplary performance in accordance with criteria defined by local school boards. It should be noted that industry certifications are continually being revised or discontinued, and new ones created to stay current with technology and new skills and techniques in the workplace, and to ensure that credentials are relevant and recognized by business and industry. As listed on pages I through J of item L, 12 credentials have been added, and 13 credentials have been discontinued by the provider and no longer offered. These adjustments will result in a total of 454 board-approved credentials. The board-approved number prior to this pending action was 455. The superintendent of instruction recommends that the Board of Education waive first review and approve the 12 new industry certification examinations, occupational competency assessments, and professional licenses to meet the Board of Education's requirement for 1, graduation effective for students who entered the 9th grade prior to 2018 school year. 2, requirements for graduation effective with students who entered the 9th grade in 2018-19, and requirements for the career and technical education, advanced mathematics, and STEM SEALs. Further, that the board approve the removal of the 13 credentials which are no longer offered by the provider.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Are there any questions on this item? Thorough as always. So is there a motion then to waive first review and adopt? Dr. Paxton? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Davis-Vaught. Dr. Wilson?
Aye.
Ms. Davis-Vaught?
Aye.
Dr. Duran?
Aye.
Ms. Holton?
Aye.
Dr. Mann?
Aye.
Dr. Paxton?
Aye.
Mr. Swan? And I vote aye. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That moves us down to item M, progress towards implementation of the recommendations from JLARC. And who's got this? Dr. Hollins. There we go. Okay. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gecker, Vice President Wilson, and board members, and Dr. Lane. I'm Linda Revia, and Dr. Hollins and I will share the presentation opportunity this afternoon regarding the JLARC reports. I'm pleased to report that the agency staff has been working diligently on the many recommendations. And so today, you may remember that in the last quarter of 2020, JLARC provided 3 reports to the public. In October, there was a review of the Virginia Department of Education. In November, there was a review of the Children's Services Act program. And in December, there was a review of the K-12 special education services. So I will begin our presentation with the information relative to the Virginia Department of Education, and then pass the baton, if you will, to Dr. Hollins so that she can provide you with information relative to the other 2 JLARC reports. Next slide, please. While I am excited to share with you that there were 59 recommendations and policy options, today we're just going to focus on the ones that we feel are most germane to the board. And I know that you have the opportunity to look at all of them. However, we wanted to honor your time today and really bring up information relative to the items that you may have to act on in the future, or that were required General Assembly action that then might revert back to directives or mandates for the agency with reference to the board. So we will provide information briefly, and then it's also important to note that some of these recommendations that the agency is working with are being impacted by other entities beyond the control of the agency. So for example, we work with VITA. Many of you are very familiar with VITA and their processes, which have delayed some of our work, but I would like to say publicly that we're appreciative of Dr. Lane and his efforts with Dr. Myers to work with the VITA leadership to hopefully help us advance on some of the recommendations that are agency specific so that we can show good faith in responding to the JLARC reports. So next slide, please. So in 2018, JLARC approved a resolution directing staff to review the Virginia Department of Education. And you might ask, why would this be the case? It's because it is a large state agency and it plays a critical role in educating Virginia's children, and it had not been reviewed by JLARC in many years. And you may be aware that JLARC does review state agencies over time in a cyclical process. So it was our time to have this review. So again, we did provide this report to you back in January, but today we want to talk about the specific work that's been done in the agency relative to those reports. So in this slide, you're seeing why the slide was required and why was the study commissioned. So in order to complete the report, JLARC staff undertook extensive reviews of agency documents and procedures. They conducted a survey of department staff. They interviewed staff and they conducted focus groups, all of which to try to give them a comprehensive picture of the agency, its processes, its protocols, and just to underscore again, because the agency has such an impact on all of Virginia's citizens, an important process to undertake. So please, next slide. In doing this, there were several study findings, and you will see that overall these findings were positive, but they also included specific recommendations in areas that you might expect from such a study. Key areas fell primarily in the areas of support and supervision of school divisions, school improvement programming, and several components related to the recruitment and retention of a diverse and highly qualified staff for our schools. Next slide, please. So as I shared earlier, Dr. Hollins and I are not going to go through every single recommendation or policy option, but we are going to highlight a few that fall under the purview of the board, as well as those that may require General Assembly action. So first bullet here, you will see that the agency staff are developing a work plan to extend current procedures that we have in place relative to the compliance of school divisions and meeting the standards of quality. And the second bullet, you will see the functionality of the agency's website is really critical in order for school divisions to have access to support and information necessary to guide their day in, day out operations, and also for the stakeholders of Virginia to be able to get the information that they're seeking. So the communication staff is working diligently to determine what might be a way for us to better create a website that is more intuitive, as well as including a calendar of professional development events for educators across Virginia so they may know what those events are and get those on their own calendars early. Mr. Bowling is working with the Virtual Virginia staff to potentially use an LMS, learning management system, that all of our educators have access to an account as a way that we might be able to share the calendar of professional development easily to all school divisions and all educators. And then finally, not wanting to take the thunder away from Dr. Ortiz and newly Dr. Dreyer, because the presentation following this one is very much an in-depth presentation regarding school improvement. But continuous improvement processes have been part of the agency's work for years, and the Office of School Quality has been reviewing and revising current practices and will provide you additional information in their presentation. So I want to honor your time and also defer to Dr. Ortiz and Dr. Dreyer, as I know they're going to give you very extensive information relative to the progress on this recommendation around school improvement models. So the next three recommendations that you see on your slide are relative to, first, data. We collect a tremendous amount of data at the agency, and you as a board are seeing much of that data in reports throughout the year. So while the school divisions are required to provide a variety of data points, the JLARC study was really focusing on what might be additional data or how might we parse the data differently in order to make sure that we are retaining and recruiting the highest quality licensed teachers in our school divisions, and that we have some sense of who are these school divisions who have vacancies, where are the positions filled, what is the diversity of this population. And so Our data and research team, as well as Patty Pitts in licensure, are looking to provide additional training and support to our school divisions in making sure that those data fields are clearly defined and that we can collect that information, which in turn will be used by Dr. Atkins and her staff and by Ms. Pitts as they look at how do we help support school divisions in recruiting and retaining the best qualified staff, as well as a diverse staff for all of our children. The next one talks about the current code around the Advisory Board on Teacher Education and Licensure. And this was a recommendation that the board advise that the code be changed relative to the ABTEL committee. And what we found is that in reviewing the code is broad enough right now that it does give the board the opportunity to ask ABTEL to provide policies regarding recruitment and retention of licensed teachers and other licensed staff. So the code already gives that provision in place. So he feels very confident that that particular recommendation coming out of the JLARC report has been met already. And then finally, the General Assembly had, the JLARC report had two policy options for the General Assembly to consider around the actual membership of the Board of Education. And those were key to making sure that the board membership was a broad representation of the constituents regionally in Virginia, as well as having some particular expertise in the areas of local government, career and technical education, as well as early childhood. And I'm happy to report that the current membership of the board meets both of these policy options. And so I think that these are important because you as a group do represent all Virginians, and it is positive that it didn't require General Assembly action for us to have a board that is very diverse in representing the regions of Virginia, as well as a variety of areas that are important to the Department of Ed's work and to the board's work. Much like this morning, you've heard information around career and technical education, as well as early childhood. So I think it really goes to support this idea that the board memberships having a diverse set of background is really important to meeting the needs of all Virginians. And so at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Hollins so that she can begin to present on the other two JLARC reports. Dr. Hollins?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rivia. Good afternoon, President Gecker, Dr. Wilson, board members, and Dr. Lane. My name is Dr. Samantha Hollins, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Special Education and Student Services here at the department. Linda has teed me up so nicely, so I'm just going to jump into the first study. If you're following our timeline, right on the heels of the agency study, the report from the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission on a review of the Office of Children's Services, in particular the provisions of that office on supporting students based out of private day special education schools was released. Unlike our counterpart agency studies, CSA and OCS have been a huge focus of work by both the General Assembly and JLARC. Many of you, if you have an interest in this area or serving in local school divisions, probably remember a cost and analysis survey and study that was done. And so this really was a natural iteration of some of that work we've seen over the last couple of years, with a particular focus on studying students served in more restrictive placements. This report contained a total of 18 recommendations, 9 of which had the ability to impact the Virginia Department of Education, and 4 of those were directly impacted by General Assembly legislation or Appropriation Act language in the previous session. And so obviously, definitely increasing the work of the department to do as a result of what was studied within this particular JLARC study. As we look at the findings, we really saw some pretty big trends around spending and what has been driving increase of spending around these services, and really the nature of students and supports that are provided. As you can imagine, students with intensive support needs, particularly around behavior and support that may look a little bit different than what some of our local school divisions are resourced to provide, was really a large focus of the study. And so some of the next steps you'll see detailed on the following slide really speak to the role in the department in moving this work forward. And so there are 3 main areas in which we'll see our continued partnership with the Office of Children's Services, as well as students that are supported by the CSA Act. And in our next slide, you can see that entails guidance and communication to the field regarding these changes in regulations and policies and procedures that are implemented. We also will continue what we feel is a very successful collaboration with the Office of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, as well as the Office of Children's Services. The department will not only participate in a work group around these items, but also work to outreach the stakeholders involved in local decision-making throughout the Commonwealth in order to move this work forward. And obviously, we will continue internally to study the needs and the impact on the department and work with Dr. Lane as well as leadership here to inform any additional resources or support that are necessary based on work that comes out of this work group. So with that, I'm going to transition to the last study from JLARC that happened this last calendar year, and that, of course, is the review of K-12 special education in Virginia. This study was published in December, and so it's a little bit of an early Christmas present to us here at the department. Within this report, we have 27 total recommendations. I am happy to report that due to the very hard work of staff within the Department of Special Education and Student Services, all but 5 of those recommendations are either completed or in progress. So you can imagine that this has been a flurry of work, but it's really coincided nicely with some of the innovations and improvements we're looking to make within state level leadership and monitoring of local school divisions. Unlike some of the predecessors with the agency study and CSA, it has been quite a number of years since JLARC studied, quite frankly, any component related to special education, much less a focus on core services that are provided. And you'll notice that the study title is about a review of K-12 education. It really did focus on the relationship of the Virginia Department of Education and our connection with local school divisions. And so you'll see here a lot of it focused on the provision of support and services, as well as the role of DOE in monitoring. This also coincided nicely with some work we've been doing with our federal partners, particularly from the Office of Special Education Programs. And they performed a monitoring visit for Virginia, which happens pretty periodically, but is based on a number of factors. And quite frankly, ours was based on the number of years it had been since our federal partners have worked with us on something that's really targeted around monitoring. And that happened in May of 2019. As we transition to the next slide, you'll see that the study really focused on a number of areas that are very important for our provision of services to local school divisions, as well as for students. Many of the recommendations identify the department, which obviously creates an impact on both our fiscal and human resources of the agency, but we also see a huge opportunity to implement the recommendations and impact on our local school divisions. And so you'll see some of these larger buckets, if you will, really focus on some of the work that we've already identified through the agency study, as well as some of the continuing innovations and improvements we've made under Dr. Lane's leadership. And finally, I just want to leave you with a couple of bullet points on how this is directly impacting our students, because that's the most important work for us here at the department. And we have truly put a priority on those recommendations that impact students and their family directly, working on getting parent-friendly resources out, with a focus on transition services, with a focus on appropriate diploma options, and creating really collaborative but also jointly effective educational opportunities, working with a variety of our partners across the state, whether it's our National Parent Teacher Information Resource Center, PTE, and through a number of special education focused advocacy organizations that come to the table with me directly throughout the year to really talk about their concerns and how we can partner together to make sure families, students, parents, and communities have what they need to support our students with disabilities and making sure they're successful not only academically, but far beyond the time that they take to walk across the stage. So with that, I will pause, and I know I speak for Dr. Revio when I say thank you for your time, and we're more than happy to answer any questions related to any of the 3 JLARC reports we just reviewed.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. Thanks to you both for the presentation. And I don't necessarily have a question, but just an observation that the recommendations and the actions that the department is taking, particularly around the 3rd report, Dr. Hollins, that you reviewed, well, two observations. Generally across all 3 of the reports that you all have highlighted, to some degree, I wonder if there's an opportunity for us to communicate more fully, proactively about what is happening at the department to the broader public, because sometimes there's a misperception because people just don't know what the department is doing in each of these areas, or how the department is improving and all of those kinds of things. Maybe we are victims of not wanting to toot, the horn too loudly, but I think there may be an opportunity. The second is particularly around the third report on special education and its connection to the overall work of the board around equity, around teacher quality, around, tying the response to the JLARC report, the department's response to the JLARC report, to the overall work of the board in the area of equity, teacher quality, principal preparation and support, all of those things, just ensuring that we are very clearly aligning all of the, I know that we are, but it gets back to communication. How are we helping people understand that the work in response to the JLARC report is not isolated work, but rather it's a part of the larger whole, and ensuring that we are drawing those connections consistently as we talk about the work across the board. So an observation, question, not necessarily for discussion, though you're welcome to respond, only bringing it up here as an item for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I think those are all wonderful points. I will say that it's been great to have the support, obviously, with Dr. Reedy and her work, but I would speak personally that Dr. Lane and Mr. Fairhart have ensured that the work across these three reports has been part of our continued meeting process at a VDOE leadership level, and most importantly, really to even go as far as restructuring some of the positions within the department, so that ability to collaborate around some of our key priorities that you mentioned around teacher recruitment, retention and quality development, as well as equity, is really at the forefront of our conversation whenever we meet. And so I've really appreciated that support. And I think also, keep in mind, this is year 2 for me, right? But since coming on board, it's really been wonderful to take the information, the work happening here at the department, and not only make a concerted effort to make sure that our local school divisions are aware of that, but to take time to directly speak to parents and families. And I just want to give a huge shout out to my Office of Facilities and Family Engagement, which has created those opportunities for me, whether it's next week at our Connect for Success workshop for parents, whether it's through our continued educational opportunities and working with our Parent Education Advocacy and Training Center, or like I stated, meeting with folks who are heading up advocacy organizations, everybody from the Autism Society of America Central Virginia chapter to Advocacy Rights, our 3 developmental disabilities agencies in the state. I think that has been a really welcome, not only opportunity for networking, but I think those organizations truly feel that we are available and want to hear feedback, and most importantly, make ourselves available and being able to provide direct updates and hear feedback on those updates from a variety of communities. So I really appreciate those remarks, and we'll continue to keep that among the forefront of our planning.
Okay, anybody else? Ms. Holton.
Thank you. I appreciate those presentations. First, one thing I just want to highlight for the public that I was very pleased to see in the JLARC report, that part of what JLARC did was survey the school divisions on the services they receive, the support they receive from VDOE, and that those results, that survey was overwhelmingly positive, that there were 90+% on each of the questions they asked, that VDOE staff are professional and respectful, satisfied with the division's relationship with VDOE, staff provide accurate information, et cetera. That would not have been the case some years ago. And I think that reflects some real significant effort from the department to be very service oriented and support oriented to the divisions. And I applaud the hard work that's gone into getting to those outcomes, where the divisions now really see the department as a partner. I do have some questions about the school improvement piece that I'll save for the next presentation, but beyond that, one of the big picture recommendations I heard coming through was in 2 of the reports, the special ed one and the general one, was about what more can the department do to help attract and retain teachers, high quality teachers. And I would love to hear, maybe I missed it, but I would love to hear more about what we're doing beyond. I mean, data collection is an important piece, but Some of the recommendations are regarding additional, that might well require additional staffing. And it's a little bit frustrating to have JLARC tell us we need to work harder to attract and retain teachers, because we've been telling the General Assembly that, and some of it depends on money, and that just hasn't yet been there. However, what more could we do with existing resources to more aggressively address these issues, both within special ed and more broadly? Are there things we can do about strengthening our education preparation programs? Are there things we can do in a targeted way to work with divisions that are particularly challenged around attracting and retaining teachers, and generally, and special ed teachers specifically? And even, is there more that, are there ways we can expand our capacity to address these issues? And this may be for Dr. Lane, but I'm curious. I mean, there were a number of recommendations from JLARC, which we appreciate, that the General Assembly needs to fund more positions. But unless and until that happens, is there CARES Act money or other federal relief money that can be used to jumpstart these efforts?
Well, Secretary Holton, thank you so much for that feedback. And I know that Dr. Revia and perhaps Dr. Lane will weigh in, but just briefly, I will tell you, of course, whenever we look at studies around areas of need for teachers, we always see special education listed. That's always on the list, and it's usually pretty high on the list. And so this has always been a huge piece of the work that we here at the department have done, whether it's been identifying federal, state set-aside funds to use directly towards helping to prop up and support higher education programs, to help engage with teacher preparation candidates and make sure that they're highly qualified and really receive the kind of support that they need within that system before they even enter into a classroom. But we've also not just been, I think, comfortable to sit on those laurels, right? We continue to partner with our federal partners around attract, retain, and recruit, which has really been a huge impact. This is not just a Virginia problem, it's a national problem. And so we continue to kind of seek out some innovative approaches to that. We've been one of the only states that has conducted actual research in this field, and we've worked through our journey into Teaching Academy to really target a couple of school divisions that struggle mightily with having special ed teachers not only identified and serving in positions as opposed to long-term substitutes, but to keep those teachers for a number of years and to make sure they're fully licensed. And I can say that the progress we've seen in that program through Regions 1 and 8, as well as with Petersburg City Public Schools this year, have been incredible. And so we're looking to build on that effective research and see how we can grow that model, as well as seek outside additional funding. The Department of Special Education and Student Services has received 2 major grants over the last 2 years from the U.S. Department of Education focused on recruitment and retention of specialized instructional support staff, and we are not done yet. We are always out there looking for resources and opportunity to be among the best and brightest and thinking innovatively about the programs that we can offer to our local school divisions, our higher ed partners, and most importantly, talk to more people about the gift that being involved in education is and how we can support them. And most importantly, to Dr. Wilson's point, helping to bring a lens of equity so that we're working to support teacher candidates and those interested in the field that look like the students that they're serving. And so to creating those positive relationships. And so I'll step off my soapbox now, but we agree with you. This is incredibly important, and we are not done seeking ways to continue to resource this and also find a solution that works for Virginia.
And I'll just add a little more. I don't think we can completely detach this for the need for additional resources, because I don't think that the things that are going to really make an impact on teacher recruitment and retention are going to happen shy of some of the investments the board has already been advocating for. So obviously higher teacher pay would be a number 1 priority. A number 2 priority would be fully funding the standards of quality. But some of the things that we're thinking about, and in no way do I intend this to be comprehensive, Ms. Holton, but we're thinking about how we can provide some efficiencies. So one of the things that we're exploring or beginning to think about is, could we create a statewide teacher application and points portal to make the licensure process more efficient, to reduce the cost on buying these systems locally, but then teacher applications and information could transfer between division to division. And when a teacher applies to one division, they can apply to 10 or 15 at a time. We have a portal like that, but it doesn't actually link to the local systems. And so we think kind of bringing that technology a little bit more modern will open up more candidate opportunities across the divisions. Obviously, the number one factor in retention, in addition to teacher pay, is principal support. And so we've really ramped up a lot of different opportunities in the principal support realm, but I think there's more to do there. And I think what you're going to hear in the school improvement report is going to talk about this idea of case management and how we can provide tailored support to school divisions in addition to those schools that just are struggling to meet our accreditation benchmarks. But I will say, and we were hoping that JLARC would be more aggressive on recommending your SOQs. We were also hoping that JLARC would be more aggressive on the staffing that we need. But you may have seen in their first report that, that employees at the department are routinely reporting working more than 40 and sometimes 60 hours a week, and that there is a capacity issue. And so part of what you're going to see in the next report is how we're going to make some recommendations to increase capacity, especially in this very localized technical assistance that we think will help in these factors. JLARC made a number of recommendations around teacher mentoring, not your SOQ, but mentoring applications and mentoring processes. We've already started the process to update some of those. But again, I think the big impact comes with the resources that the board has been recommending.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? If not, thank you both for the presentation, and we will move on to item N. Thank you. Office of School Quality's response to recommendations from the JLARC report. Dr. Ortiz, and I guess now newly minted Dr. Dreyer. Is that what I was given to understand before?
Well, Dr. Dreyer tells me that when you defend your dissertation at one of the Virginia universities, post-defense, you can be called doctor. But he says at Harvard, however you say it up there, at Harvard, it is actually delayed until the moment of graduation. But I also want to add my congrats to Matt.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, good afternoon, President Gecker, members of the board, and Dr. Lane. It's been nearly 9 months since I joined the agency and 6 months since I last presented to this board. I'm Dr. Relly Ortiz, the Director of the Office of School Quality, and co-presenting with me this afternoon is the newly minted Matt Dreyer, a doctoral resident within our unit. On behalf of the tiny but mighty OSQ team, I bring greetings, and I'm proud to share just a piece of our work with you during this presentation. And so our purpose this afternoon is to provide information that addresses the Office of School Quality's response to the JLARC recommendations. Thank you to our colleagues, Dr. Revia and Dr. Hollins, for providing some of the context during the previous presentation. Our presentation will provide some additional context, analysis, and possible next steps. Our charge was to recommend a new school improvement model for use throughout the Commonwealth, one that focuses on coordinating and providing personalized quality support to our divisions and schools. The proposed plan is a multi-year plan that allows our team to develop and implement a comprehensive school improvement model for all schools to work with currently identified schools with level 2 and level 3 school quality indicators, and to identify and provide intense support for schools on the cusp of being identified. It is our goal, as schools are identified, that the Office of School Quality will provide targeted support in order to make timely adjustments to impact student learning. The Office of School Quality is responsible for monitoring state and federally identified schools. Schools identified with a level 2 school quality indicator in academic achievement or level 3 in any of the school quality indicators, and divisions with a memorandum of understanding require and receive OSQ support. During the 1920 school year, more than 250 of the state's 1,825 public schools were identified for monitoring. Due to the impacts of COVID and waived accreditation for the current year and next year, we are operating with 1920 data. The OSQ's current personnel authorization is 12 staff members, including myself, the Associate Director, our admin assistant, and a mix of federal and state school improvement coordinators and specialists. The current ratio of 1 OSQ team member to 22 schools requiring assistance has severely limited the VDOE's ability to move far beyond from a compliance-focused approach to a school improvement model that utilizes a coaching approach that supports co-constructing sustainable capacity at the school and division level. As noted from the JLARC report, many of the OSQ processes were compliance-driven with little personalization or coaching. Based on feedback from the field, school leaders did not agree that our office helped to build capacity or sustainable improvements. And survey respondents also shared that there was little trust between OSQ and the divisions and schools we supported. And just as we say with our students, we can't reach them if we can't teach them. So in our transformation over the past year, we embedded frequent opportunities to work side by side and co-construct a personalized model of support while also maintaining the fidelity in the compliance piece of our work. So the JLARC report provides 3 recommendations regarding school quality. Today's presentation addresses recommendation 8. The General Assembly in its budget language directed to the department to develop and implement a plan to be presented to the chairs of the House Education and Appropriations Committee and Senate Education and Health and Finance and Appropriations Committees no later than November 1st, 2021. So in our current structure and areas of responsibility, we have provided here some additional context regarding the office's work. As noted in the top right of your screen, the compliance piece remains our primary charge. But how we approach that work has truly morphed based on Dr. Lane's vision, the support of the agency, feedback from our stakeholders, and also the most recent revisions to the SOAs. A large percentage of our resources are still used in support of divisions with a memorandum of understanding and identified level 2 and level 3 schools. In this year alone, our office conducted phase 1 and phase 2 of state and federal monitoring for approximately 300 schools. If you note, that's the last bullet under OSQ compliance. In this process, we not only satisfied the compliance portion of state and federal requirements, but we also took advantage of the time to provide feedback on the school improvement process utilizing the coaching approach, which nearly all of the division leaders and school principals commended and shared an appreciation for the new process. And from the initial report where trust was a huge barrier until now, we have built some strong bridges throughout the state by offering that meaningful support and coaching. And during this year have received technical assistance requests from nearly 60 divisions, including Nottoway, Danville, Norfolk, Buckingham, Greensville, and Portsmouth, just to name a few. After the monitoring meetings, those same team members followed up with a written report of recommendations to the schools. This second round, which our team is currently in the midst of, will allow us to dig deeper into schools' essential actions and continue to model effective monitoring strategies and probing questions to support instructional leadership in our schools. So with all the necessary and impactful work taking place, there are still opportunities to expand support in areas such as targeted professional learning, facilitating professional learning networks for divisions and schools with like needs, and offering true and consistent collaboration in support of student achievement. Just last week, our office held a principal leader conference in support of current principals and also to provide support to the assistant principal pipeline. We had nearly 400 participants over the 2 days, and based on survey data, over 95% of participants reported that the sessions were beneficial or extremely beneficial. So we know there's a need for collaboration and professional learning among our educators, and as leaders of school quality within the Commonwealth, we are obligated to support those needs. And as you can see by the sheer number of staff in this organizational structure, there are some foundational restraints that limit this team's ability. And so while we are doing the work to advance VDOE's efforts to provide support and resources to meet school divisions' continuous improvement needs, as noted in red, the VDOE is not optimally organized, nor is the Office of School Quality adequately resourced to support the current nearly 300 schools in our care with a school rating of level 2 or 3, provide intense supports for our divisions with a memorandum of understanding and their leadership teams, and truly advance the work of school quality and continuous improvement throughout the Commonwealth. Under our authorizing environment of ESSA and the SOAs, we retain the primary charge of providing technical assistance to ensure all schools are improving and moving toward full accreditation. So in addition to providing context and some additional data points, we also want to highlight that our approach is in line with this board's priority to ensure the successful implementation of the profile of a Virginia graduate and the accountability system for school quality, and the agency's goal to ensure student success, and high school quality. In yesterday's board meeting, Dr. Gorham from Virginia Beach, Dr. Geyer from Goochland, and Dr. McCullough from BASCD, and a few others discussed micro-credentials and how that work supports the need for a personalized approach to professional learning. In that same vein, our approach must be personalized. And in addition to the personalization aspect, another layer requires a trusting and collaborative partnership with school and division leadership. Our office and the agency accepts and embraces our charge to advance divisions and schools' resources and efforts to ensure a culture of continuous improvement. And truly, this is a highly personalized approach and systematic process. And currently, our office is not adequately staffed to do this work in depth. In regards to a future ask for funding, we developed a plan for the transition to a new school improvement model with an estimate of additional staffing for a model that will strengthen and differentiate our work with schools and divisions. I'll pass it to Matt now to share some additional research and some recommendations for next steps.
Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. After reviewing the research surrounding state education agencies' role in school improvement, we found that states, uniquely positioned at the intersection of federal, local, and external stakeholders, can serve as coordinators of capacity building efforts throughout the statewide system of supports. Systemic capacity for change is achieved by the state creating and disseminating knowledge, enhancing the supply of personnel equipped for school improvement, and providing the necessary data systems to support school improvement. But to do so, they must be able to move beyond the rules-based technical assistance and reach far more deeply into the operation of schools, as well as draw upon the talent and expertise outside of the SEA's traditional compliance roles. However, reaching deeply into the inner workings of Virginia's 132 different school divisions, absent understanding the contextual factors impacting their performance, may lead to imposing solutions absent a clear understanding of the problem, or worse, layering on solutions that fail to address root causes. Schools and districts are complex adaptive systems where parts of the system change as they interact with one another. Therefore, any interventions must take a systems approach to problem identification or risk treating the symptom, not the root cause of the problem. Moreover, state education agencies attempting to improve school performance through technical assistance should do so in ways that not only address these complexities through tailored support, but also capture the lessons learned from each intervention to increase the agency's organizational capacity and adaptability. Looking across the country at what other improvement models states are employing, we found several states, Ohio, Georgia, and North Carolina, introducing regional case management systems. We will continue to monitor and dialogue with these states to capitalize on their lessons learned and to help inform the OSQ's transformation. Our approach focuses on two levels: aligning the department's internal processes and adding capacity. The technical and adaptive nature of school quality work demands a coherent whole of DOE strategy, which cannot be achieved through siloed or ad hoc tactics. An emerging example of the interdepartmental collaboration approach to school improvement occurs right now during the corrective action plan review meetings with our MOU divisions. During these monitoring meetings, department representatives from special education, VTSS, elementary and secondary education, and the Office of School Quality execute their monitoring and oversight responsibilities with division leadership, which leads to a more unified, coherent experience for the division. This concept isn't new. Indeed, the DOE strategic plan identifies the need to collaborate across the DOE departments and offices to develop a database, continuous school and child care improvement planning process encompassing the school and child care quality indicators to build local leadership capacity. The missing element then is to actualize this by adopting and embracing a unified approach with not just accountability, but shared responsibility for school quality throughout the Commonwealth. In addition to department representation, we believe that to truly meet the needs of schools and divisions, we need their voice in the conversation and will include them in advisory roles to the committee. Our second recommendation involves building on the department's regional superintendent model and the Office of School Quality's emerging regional liaisons. In this model, the Office of School Quality maintains compliance and statewide coordination responsibilities in collaboration with the department's School Quality Committee. Regional support teams will collaborate with divisions, schools, educators, families, and regional partners through a continuous improvement process to ensure each child in Virginia has access to a high-quality education. These regional support teams provide professional learning opportunities and needs-based coaching focused on building leadership capacity, team development, and inclusive instructional practices to assist schools in improving educational outcomes. This model gives the department the capacity to differentiate support by need and leverage the power of deep collaboration to identify and address root causes inhibiting high-quality instruction. Here you see the representative capabilities resident in each regional support team. While these capabilities represent most of the functional areas division and school leaders must provide, they must also integrate them together in a coherent manner. We envision the preponderance of the team's efforts going to the schools and divisions that need it most, those with an MOU, level 3, and level 2 indicators. We also see the office identifying schools for targeted support based more on identified need, versus demand, and providing high-quality universal support to all schools and divisions throughout the Commonwealth by leveraging the department's position within the education sector to convene stakeholders together in communities of practice. The regional support team lead will help identify opportunities for growth and take a systemic approach to build the capacity of division and school leadership to address these issues. Key to the success of this model is the increased use of data to drive decision-making. Our goal is to not only use reflective data to engage schools and divisions that are in identified status, but to identify those that are at risk of moving toward identified status. In understanding that scaling from our current 12-person office to a full-blown regional support team model is a process and quite an undertaking, we also recommend adding an interim capacity in the near term to set the conditions for future success. By adding 5 full-time employees, we'll be able to expand our support capacity to increase support to MOU, level 3 and level 2 schools, going from 2 visits a year to 3 visits a year, followed up with monthly check-ins, increased use of data-informed decision-making. We'll also be able to use data in leading the school quality committee and broaden our technical assistance offerings based on need. Here you can see the phased approach with increased office school quality personnel capacity. Of note, you will see that the OSQ staff to schools in need of support ratio is currently 1:22. With an interim capacity of 1 data analytics specialist and an additional 4 school improvement specialists, we reduced that ratio from 1 OSQ member to 13 identified schools. And then in the full OSQ capacity, you see adding another data specialist and 10 people per regional support team, which would give us a ratio of 1 OSQ member to 4 identified schools. As we build the department's capacity, we increase our scope and scale, moving from compliance to coaching in the interim, followed by case management and capacity building in a regional structure. We see the estimated cost of the interim capacity beginning in FY23, followed by the projected cost going forward from FY24. Adopting both recommendations requires changes to the department's resources, processes, and priorities. This is a multi-year endeavor that, to be implemented with fidelity, will require the department to identify and install the necessary competency, leadership, and organizational drivers. We're excited to develop the plan over the upcoming months and continue the office's transformation. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Ortiz to bring us home.
Thank you, Matt. In our office, we repeatedly say that without data, we fall back on what we want to believe. This data demonstrates that even with the will and skill, OSQ does not have the number of staff to effectively create and sustain a model of continuous school improvement throughout our 132 school divisions, and more specifically with the 267 identified schools that are currently in our care. In order to personalize support and resources, we need a staffing model that supports the different needs of our divisions and division leadership capacity. We need a model that supports the work of the principals, that supports the work of the teachers, that ultimately positively impacts student outcomes. So with the target of meeting schools where they are and building from that point to ensure all students receive the high quality education they deserve, our team needs the human capital to work collaboratively, efficiently, and effectively to improve identified schools, support those that are on the cusp of being identified, and also to provide a foundation of continuous school improvement for all schools throughout Virginia, because we know there is always room for growth and improvement. The expanded regional support model will be a huge step toward actualizing that goal. The regional support teams will utilize a systematic approach using the drivers that research, Dr. Lane and the team have illustrated as true levers in improving student outcomes. And those include the implementation of an aligned and culturally relevant curriculum, the provisions of common assessments that are aligned, the analysis of student achievement data to identify the needs, the implementation of tailored, timely, tiered, evidence-based interventions, the implementation of effective professional learning communities, the utilization of technology to support, track, and monitor data systems, and effective utilization of the teacher evaluation system that facilitates solid partnerships between human resources and principals. So as we're preparing to wrap up the presentation portion, I want to highlight the strengths of this model, which are in building capacity among our superintendents, division leadership, and principals, and strengthening instructional leadership. As referenced earlier with the Principal Leader Conference, the leaders across Virginia are hungry for collaboration and thought partners as they construct support within their own schools and divisions. This model is also inclusive of other areas of focus as noted here on the slides related to data utilization, supporting an aligned curriculum and aligning resources, processes, and priorities. As Board Member Holton commented during the previous presentation, we truly want to be partners in this work. And so the JLARC report did put a spotlight on areas that BDOE and OSU had the foresight to identify as areas of improvement, which boil down to the fact that in order to truly assess the unique challenges affecting student performance and to personalize support and resources, we need a staffing model that supports that work. So in building a better way forward, internally, Dr. Lane has supported the establishment of the School Quality Committee, which Matt mentioned earlier. And externally, we plan to ask for additional funding to support an expanded school quality organization model. Thank you all for leaning in during our presentation. At this time, we will respond to any questions you all may have or open the floor for comments.
Okay, are there any questions? And thank you both for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, I guess first Dr. Duran, then then Dr. Wilson, then Ms. Holton, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Gecker. Just no major questions, but I just want to say, Dr. Ortiz, thank you for the good overview presentation. And I really appreciated you and Mr. or Dr. Dreyer putting together the real need for what the resources are. Oftentimes, and I've said it, yesterday I was talking about early childhood. We have a lot of great ideas and plans, but really understanding what that's going to mean to implement those and to really do them well and to support and be that support that I heard you talking about, Dr. Ortiz, and your whole focus throughout. It was very clear to me that in your role as Director of School Quality, you see your charge is to support our schools and divisions, and being able to effectively do that. I'm really glad you were able to articulate what that looks like and what's needed. So I hope that we'll be able to continue how we support that, whether it's us at the state board, what we can do, the General Assembly, et cetera. Dr. Lane, I know will find ways to make sure we can really walk the talk of what we're saying we want to do, because oftentimes it's the inability to do that that then causes some of the inequities we see, that causes some of the school divisions not getting the direct supports that they should be getting. And it's not simply because there's not a desire, but as you laid out so clearly in these last few slides, in these recommendations, the two of you, it's really a need that our central VDOE needs to have put in place in order to make that happen. So I just want to thank you for kind of crystallizing that. I think it's stuff we kind of knew already, but for the public and everyone to see and understand how important that's going to be to match what the research and our best practices tell us needs to be happening, and then our ability to actually deliver that. So I just want to commend you for that. It really gave me a good visual. I had thought about it before, but I was really able to visualize it in a different way. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Duran.
Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. Dr. Ortiz, thank you so much. Mr. Dreyer, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate the shift in the culture, this cultural shift that you're seeking with the Office of School Quality. That's very clear. And I like the idea of this support coaching. Thank you for pointing us toward other states that are doing similar work, particularly North Carolina. But I do have one question just for clarity. So I think what I hear you saying, and as I read the presentation, the goal is to have a model of coaching and support while also holding divisions accountable. So in the model that you line out for FY23 and then subsequently in 24-25, of the members of that team that you identify, who would actually kind of be the lead? I understand that there's a team working with each division, but among the list of positions, kind of where does the responsibility for the coach rest? Does that question make sense?
And so, Dr. Wilson, I think I understand the question. If I don't, let's go back to it in my response.
Sure.
The primary responsibility would still live within the Office of School Quality. And so our arm would be extended with the regional support teams. And so the accountability is still to us to move the lever with student outcomes, but really taking that team approach to personalize and what do they need? How are we utilizing the data, analyzing the data to determine what they need and really co-constructing that with the division.
And so is it the specialists that you have listed there? Would that be their primary role to kind of be the point person within or to each of the divisions, and then the other roles, the other functions then come on as support, finance, HR, all of the, okay. Thank you, that clarifies. Yeah, great, thank you. The model is really intriguing. Thank you.
Ms. Holton.
So my first question, thank you for the great work. My first question is to timing. So I see you saying, recommending that we take the interim staffing up, to your recommended interim level, which means adding 5 people, still to a frankly woefully inadequate level as from what we're hearing from you based on what's going on in other states, but that we're talking about doing that in the fiscal year 23. And we're now in fiscal 21. So we're talking about 15 months before we even begin this ramp up. And that really worries me. Is there any way we can accelerate the ramp up? Again, we've got all these federal funds now coming you all's way, and that this should be at the heart of what those federal funds are about. How are we addressing equity? How are we addressing our neediest schools? And if we can't ramp it up, is there any way we can more target your resources? So I'm very worried, we asked this question when we put the current SOA approach into effect. We put the question to your predecessor, can you manage this number of schools? And, the thought was yes, but now I'm looking at the numbers in Virginia compared to other states. We're just asking you to target too many schools for the resources you've got. And is there a way we can cut our losses, frankly, even if we've told you to target 260 schools? Is there a way we can give you permission to choose to have a very, very light touch for 150 of those 260, so you can really work with the 100 left, or whatever the right mix is? Or does it make sense to continue to do 260 schools, even if you can't do it well?
I'll answer the finance questions, Ms. Holton. Thank you for those. And there were so many questions there. I will try to make sure I get them all.
Sorry about that.
So the General Assembly has already adopted their FY22 budget, so that's why the program is targeted for FY23. Your question about using federal funds is certainly a possibility. And I apologize I didn't ask that in your answer that in your last question. The General Assembly did pass language that requires them to have oversight of the state set aside. And so whereas we have this money, we must go back to them to spend any of it. And so there is belief that there will be a special session of some kind to address these federal funds at some time in the summer, fall, or hopefully not that late. But certainly we will consider that in our proposal to them. We're always really reticent at the department to fund positions that are ongoing beyond the term of the 3 years, unless we have some certainty that the General Assembly is going to fund them in perpetuity. The General Assembly already put some things that we recommended in perpetuity into CARES Act funding. We're already facing some fears of being able to maintain some of those projects. So the answer is yes, those funds can be used. We will consider that in our proposal, but the FY23 budget will be our next opportunity for permanent and ongoing funding. So that was that question. Then your other question was around, can you relieve us of the requirement to work with schools and the such? We are already tailoring assistance, frankly. We're funded at a compliance level, right? That's very clear. And when our predecessors answered whether they had the capacity to do this, we have the capacity to do basic compliance requirements. And to be honest, what we look at is if you've only got, I'm going to use a metaphor, this isn't an exact school, but if you've only got a 1 level 2, and maybe it's just in chronic absenteeism, you get a vastly different level of support even today than if you have a number of level 3s or on the brink of being an MOU type school division. And so I would not at this time recommend changing your SOA to reduce the focus, because I think we're focusing on much better things that we did in the past. But I would continue to encourage us to tailor supports to the needs of schools, and the regional support team will be able to allow us to do that even better than we can do today. Just following on Dr. Wilson's question a second, there is the regional support team leads in that model. And so there's the specialists in the office who will, be responsible for the accountability, but the regional support team leads will be responsible for the technical assistance in those regions. And I just wanted to clarify that piece and keep in mind that we are also going to build as part of this in time, and we only alluded to this because it's not recommended in JLARC, a process, and this is what North Carolina did, where even if you're not a school in improvement, you can submit a case request to us for support from the regional support team so that we can help schools. They mentioned that it was on the cusp of needing improvement. Maybe if you're not even on the cusp of needing improvement, but you really need work in the equity space or in the HR space, we want the regional support team to be able to work with anyone, and that we really do focus on school quality, not just those that need school improvement.
Thank you, Dr. Lane.
Thank you. Anybody else? I don't see anybody. So Dr. Ortiz and almost Dr. Dreyer, thank you so much for the informative presentation. I will say that, I've had the opportunity over the last year or two, sit in on some of the MOU meetings with Dr. Ortiz, and it is fairly clear from the tone of those meetings that the office is doing a great job. I mean, uniformly respected, and the comments coming back from the local jurisdictions are always good and thankful. So the board appreciates all that you're doing in that regard.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, going to move on to item O, status report on COVID-19 impacts on pre-K to 12 education in Virginia. Assistant Superintendent Coy and Bowling, is that right?
That's correct.
Perfect.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be back with you this afternoon. I know we have the distinct honor of being last over the course of 3 days, so we will do our best to give you what's relevant here. Happy to answer questions along the way, but won't belabor this too long. So our presentation today is intended to just provide some general COVID updates to ensure that you have the latest information about what's happening in Virginia with our public schools and COVID policy and programs. And then my partner in crime here, Michael Bowling, will provide an update on the second periodic report. You will remember that the periodic reports have been required of all divisions as a condition for the 180 days, 990-hour waiver. And so we have the results from the second. This follows on the tails of the report we brought to you in January with the first report out.
We do anticipate, just by way of setting the landscape, a third and final periodic report from our divisions at the conclusion of the school year. So with that, it is my job today to just provide very high-level updates for you all as it relates to COVID activities in the Commonwealth. And on the next slide, you'll see just a couple of bullets. I am more than happy to spend time talking about any one of these items in greater detail and providing additional context. But I'm going to fly through these with you today. First, since you last received an update from the department in January, the CDC and VDH and DOE have issued updated guidance. This is the now well-known change from 6 feet to 3 feet in school settings if it facilitates bringing students back to the classroom. Virginia had already permitted 3 feet of distance in our classrooms. We were a bit ahead of the CDC there, though they caught up and we all got aligned in the end. Additionally, I just wanted to make you all aware of two pieces of legislation that came out of the 2021 session that are related to COVID in some way, shape, or form. So the first one is Senate Bill 1303. You have likely heard about this one that requires in-person instruction be offered to any enrolled student by the division in the 21-22 school year. There are some specific health circumstances in which divisions can close when there are extreme outbreaks and they receive such guidance from their local public health department. However, the baseline of this and the bottom line for students, families, and divisions alike is that 180 days, 990 hours have to be offered in person to those students who want it. Divisions may offer virtual programs on top of that requirement, and students and families may choose to opt in. Additionally, the General Assembly passed legislation related to new growth assessments. And this legislation will be phased in over the next few years. However, the immediate implications to make you all aware of are that in grades 3 through 8, math and reading, the bill requires that we assess students at the beginning of the 21-22 school year. So we will be deploying our computer adaptive tests based on SOL content in the fall. We're working through all of the details of that now, but this will be new, and those assessments will be deployed in the fall. That will give us a more nuanced way of assessing where our students are academically and what type of unfinished learning they may need to have addressed throughout the school year. And so just like our SOL tests, both parents and teachers will get the data from those assessments very quickly after they are deployed in the fall. The other items here, well, the next two, I should say, are pretty health specific. The first is a COVID screening and diagnostic testing program in Virginia schools that is actually being administered largely by the Department of Health, but we are co-administrators there. The idea here from the U.S. Health Department, Health and Human Services Department, is that significant financial resources are being made available to those schools that want to opt into voluntary screening programs for students or staff. The resources are coming down the pike. Virginia will receive about $257 million to deploy to this end. And the Virginia Department of Health is in the process of fleshing out the details of that program and administering a pilot this spring to start with those divisions that want to. Again, they can opt into this to provide that additional layer of mitigation in our school settings. It is not required as part of the CDC guidance for operating a school safely in person, but is considered to be an additional layer of protection that some schools in some programs may opt into. So it could be all your students, it could be your staff, it could be those participating in athletics. There are lots of different ways for divisions to take advantage of that if they are interested. Finally, a quick update on vaccinations of school staff. As you likely knew, we had been surveying divisions on a weekly basis to understand how the vaccination efforts were going with school staff. We are pleased to report that all divisions have been able to make vaccinations available to their staff. About 2/3 of public school division staff in Virginia have received their first dose. More than half have received both doses of their vaccine. We are continuing to track that, but on a less frequent basis as that vaccination effort plays out across the state. As I mentioned, the periodic report information you'll hear today is part of the instructional waivers. The DOE is now in the process of accepting waiver requests from divisions for relief from the 180 days, 990 hours in person this year. So any division, any school that was not able to offer all of those instructional hours in person has to go through this process. We've tried to streamline it as much as possible, and they had to participate in the periodic reporting. That is a rolling window right now. We have given divisions until May the 26th to submit their application to us. And then last but not least, just want to make you all aware of the federal relief efforts that were discussed in the end of the last conversation as well. Since we last updated you, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law in March of 2021, and it brings more than $2 billion to the Commonwealth for COVID-related relief programs in our school system. By way of context, just to give you a sense of that scale compared to previous relief packages, the first package that came through in March of 2020 was about $240 million. The second package that came through in December of 2020 was about $1 billion. These are all Virginia-specific numbers. And then, as I mentioned, this one is more than $2 billion. So by far the most significant package. The vast majority of those dollars are distributed via the title formulas directly to our divisions, but there is about $200 million there for the state set aside. So that was a lightning round on all things COVID. I'm happy to pause there and answer questions and or share additional information that may be of interest before turning it over to Michael.
Any questions? I don't see any. So I guess it's turned over to Michael. Thank you, Holly.
Sounds good. And thank you, Holly, for kicking it off and turning it over. I will pick up at this point and talk a little bit about the data that we received from school divisions regarding instructional delivery and student outcomes. This is in comparison to the first periodic data report that we issued in or requested in November. And this latest was collected in early March. We did have 132 respondents, and so we had, 100% of our divisions reported, and we will be able to provide you with a little bit of detail when it comes to instructional delivery first, and then we'll move into the student outcomes. So if you could go on to the next slide, please. So some of the key takeaways here are, and we tried to summarize these rather than going through, hundreds of data slides, but some of the key takeaways that are, while 89% of our divisions reported that they had increases in-person instructional time, 72.7% of divisions are now offering instruction at either to at least some students at 4 or 5 days per week. And they fall into the categories of partial in-person or in-person. And we will get to a breakdown of the percentages of each of those and the other categories and in just a few slides. In addition, all school divisions will be offering some in-person learning to students by April 26th. And so we are very close to that mark now. Additionally, percentages of students choosing to work fully remotely increases as they get older. And we'll have a breakdown by elementary, middle, and high school in just a minute in the following slide that breaks that down just a little bit more. And finally, 41.6% of school divisions report an increase in synchronous learning time, which I know was a particular area of interest for the board. On slide 7, you can see that we have changed our definitions just slightly. We have added a category called predominantly remote, that where learning is currently remote for at least 95% of their students, and in person for all others. In addition, if you look at these categories, in person and hybrid, and then fully remote are very self-explanatory. The partial in person and partial hybrid are basically saying that there's a mix depending on the grade levels of either hybrid or fully or in-person education. So Emily, if we can move to slide 8. Here's a comparison of instructional modalities by division, percentages of divisions in each category. So we started with September 8th with over 50% of our divisions representing well over 80% of our, or close to 80% of our student body in the fully remote category. We're now down to 1.5%. That's 2 divisions that are either falling in that predominantly remote or fully remote. And as a reminder, they will be moving into, at least one of those will be moving into another category as of April 26th. You see that we've had tremendous increases in the bottom 2 categories, moving to partial in person, which is offering 4 days per week in person for many students, or in person, that's 4 or 5 days for all. If we move to the next, there's a breakdown by region, by superintendent's region. So you can see, and this is hard to just look at these numbers and take away something, but as you want to reflect, you could go back to these data and take a deeper dive into that. On slide 10, we have a box and whisker plot for elementary, middle, and high. And for those of you that it's been a while since you've had a statistics class, I just want to remind you how box and whisker plots represent data. So first of all, the question was, what percentage of your students have chosen fully remote instruction? At that time, which was early in March, we had 3 divisions you see represented at the top, 3 dots. They were close to 100%. And so some of the divisions that were fully remote did respond with 100% as having their students choosing fully remote instruction. If you look at box and whisker plots, what is represented in the box is 50% of the sample data. So 50% of the responses fall within the box. And the number that's highlighted in the middle of each box, or slightly skewed, is the median of the entire data set. And so you see that in elementary school, we have a much lower percentage of students choosing fully remote instruction than we do in the high school setting. And I'll pause there for questions. Hearing none, I'll move on. For the academic outcomes, let's move right on to slide 13, Emily. The key findings were, as compared with the first periodic report, divisions report more elementary students at or above expected achievement levels, which is really great news. However, in both the middle and the high school, most divisions continue to report students are failing 2 or more classes as compared to the same time last year. And then finally, when we look at externally provided data, it indicates that we're seeing student growth in reading and mathematics over time. When you compare the growth in reading and mathematics, what we're seeing is lower growth when we're comparing this this year than in past years. And so I have some examples of that data, and we'll dive into that in just a couple of slides. So on slide 13, you'll see the academic outcomes. When we talk in depth about the higher percentage of divisions reporting that 50% of their students were at or above expectations in either elementary 3-5 reading and PK5 mathematics. So we're showing that 50% of the divisions are saying that their kids are doing better in those areas. They're at or above the expected level. And you can see the actual breakdown in the PK and PK2, 3-5 in each of the areas of mathematics and reading. Now, these are locally determined measures. So they were determining at or above expectations based on local measures. Then that means that not all divisions were using the same measure to determine that percentage. And 23 of the divisions reported that they were still in the process of assessing students or coming up with the results on their percentages. If you move to the next slide, this shows the breakdown of two or more students that were failing 2 or more classes compared to the second at the end of the second grading period compared to last year. And you do see increases in those areas, as I stated in the first slide. And then on slide 16, the next slide, here's one of a few examples. The first 2 slides I'm going to show you are focusing in on reading. And what this is if you'll notice, the red bars indicate the growth, the percentage growth from fall 19 to winter 20. And then the blue is fall of 20 to winter 21. And so while students are gaining and growing, they're just not gaining and growing at the same rate as last year. As we move to the next slide for reading, this is another indicator of the same that says, so this is great. So each set of bars, if you go left to right, the first 2 look at grades at grade 3, the second 2 at grade 4, the third 2 at grade 5. And what it's comparing is, this is another one of our external vendors. It's saying how much growth were students showing in previous years during the winter to March timeframe versus this year. And you see that the bars this year, there are less of the deep green than the bar to its immediate left, if that is hopefully clear. So basically you're looking at the size of the greens in comparing this year to last. If you go on to the next slide, the last 2 slides are the same types of things, and we're looking at mathematics now. And so you see that fall 19 to 20, there were some great gains in mathematics. And in 20 to 21, there's still some really tremendous gains. However, just not quite as much as we had in past as compared to last year. And then the final slide has another vendors, and it goes back to that looking at the comparison of historical data to this year's data, and the size of the green section is smaller in the right portion of each comparison. So at this point, I'll wrap it up, and I'll take questions or provide any kind of additional information that you may seek.
Okay, well, thank you both. Dr. Wilson.
I just have thank you, President Gecker. I just have a question, clarifying question. Is the data, Michael, that you just went through, is that regardless of instructional modality? So this is across all modalities that that the data is showing?
It is. Because they fluctuate, in many cases they fluctuate. And so it's hard to, we could have said at the time of, but it didn't have any kind of scale of how long they had been in that modality. So it's tough to tough to dissect that data.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Dr. Mann.
Yes, thank you, President Gecker. Thank you, Mr. Bowling. Just really one quick question. Because the slides around the outcome data talked about external, I just wondered if that was representative of all of the districts or a subset for which you had external data to appreciate sort of how students were progressing.
Dr. Mann, that's an outstanding question, and I probably should have mentioned that when I got to those slides. So thank you for bringing it up. So we did reach out to some of our external vendors that have a pretty large foothold in our school divisions. And so these are for large numbers of data, and it's typically in situations where they have comparative numbers from one year to the next, so that and it is the same assessment that they are reporting on versus our self-reported data, which differs in measures by division.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not being familiar with how many districts are using the external. What overall percent would you say it represents of the total universe of the school districts?
Right. The first bar charts were from NWEA MAP, the blue versus red. And I believe that they're in roughly, I believe, 70 to 80% of our divisions.
Okay.
Dr. Lane, is that to your?
I think it's a little lower.
Maybe a little lower than that?
Yeah. My gut was that it was that, but I think when we did the first periodic report, we found it was lower.
I think you're right. Yes. And iReady is something similar. And Holly, did you want to weigh in?
And iReady, I should mention, I believe is in Fairfax. So it represents a very large population.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I don't see any. So thank you both. Very informative. I think it's, very glad that we decided to have these periodic presentations. It really is helpful to deal with some of the data as opposed to some of the supposition around what's going on in the schools. So, although it may look like nobody's paying attention sometimes as the last presenters of the day, I can assure you we are. I mean, this is very meaningful stuff. So thank you both.
You're welcome.
Okay. We have a written report and now discussion of current issues. Anybody have any current issues they want to do? And Dr. Lane, I know you do.
Just kind of my monthly update on a couple of things. I put this in the notes to you quickly yesterday, and you may have seen it before you logged off, but it's the month of the military child. I'm the chair of the Governor's Council, and I just wanted to encourage you to, you'd like to show support for our military children. Yesterday was the state's Purple Up Day. I think my son's school is doing it today, so it kind of goes on throughout the month. And of course, we recognize schools with awards that are especially doing great work in that space. I also wanted to mention we've continued to, I've been continuing towards schools and got many of my staff to come with me, but I want to let you know that as of the end of this month, we will have visited every school division in the Commonwealth since I came. And so I've got 2 left that I've not been to, though I went to before I became superintendent. I got 1 that I went to only for a central office meeting. I promised them I'd come back and actually tour schools. And so look forward to wrapping that up and sharing reflections as we move forward. But one reflection that I will share is our school divisions are working really hard to get our students back in person. We've seen a lot of school divisions, as Michael mentioned, kind of briefly going from 2 days to 4 days and from 4 days to 5 days. And just the heroic work that to manage all this. I've seen band practice outdoors, and with gloves on and when they can. I've seen cafeterias renovated into learning spaces. I've seen gyms turned into cafeterias. And it's really been amazing. And so just a thank you to all of our school divisions out there for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for that. Any board members have anything they'd like to say? I know it's been a long 3 days, but we can extend another 10 minutes or so. Yes, Ms. Holton.
Briefly, Dr. Lane, I know how much you care about band practice, and I just want to acknowledge that we received a lot of public comment around COVID restrictions for marching band and other performing arts, and pointing out what the public commenters understood to be differences in the COVID restrictions for those activities as opposed to athletic activities. Can you address that?
Yeah, in the governor's executive order as of April 1st, those activities were identified underneath social gathering and did not have their own carve out, which severely limited the ability to have some of those projects, especially indoors. The governor announced in a press conference earlier this week that he would be updating that. And we got notice of the specifics of that today, but I know that we're going to put it out publicly tomorrow. And I think our band and performing arts folks will be very pleased. I actually think there was a slight executive order made today that's already gone out. And so Holly, do you want to go into those details?
Yeah, so the governor issued an updated executive order today to reflect that carve out for performing arts. It is different than the recreational sports carve out, but it does provide opportunity for both indoor and outdoor performances and the parameters around those.
Okay, anybody else? I don't see anyone. As I said, we've had a pretty good 3 days of work. And interestingly enough, in 3 days of work, we can actually, or 3 days of discussion, we can create about 2 years worth of work for the board. And so it may be a good time to stop meeting now before we create any more. We're getting to the point where, the workload is going to be significant. And what I plan to do, and actually Ms. Holton suggested this, is reach out to a couple board members to take the lead in some of the various areas that are going to be of high focus for us. And so, things like the continuation of the work plan with regard to evaluation and professional development. The virtual school regs is another topic, and the gifted regs is a third topic. So if you all could think about and perhaps get in contact with me, which of those areas interest you and where you'd be willing to serve as an informal liaison with the department as we move through that process, that would be very helpful. But that is, my plan, actually thanks to Ann, for how we're going to move some of this work forward and have the board engaged early on with the department as opposed to just being presented work at the end of the process. So I thank her for that suggestion. And I think that's it, unless anybody else has anything they just need to say. Other than that, the hardest working board in the Commonwealth stands adjourned. We'll see you guys in person in June.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.